be a good concert, man. You got any highlights? You ready for me to jump in? Okay. All right, Rip City Drive. What's going on, my friends? I appreciate your time. Today is actually an exciting day for me because I've been hoping to spend more time with this guy. And finally, we have this weird break in the NBA schedule. So I'm like, hey, we should spend some time together. And he said, okay, that sounds like a good idea. So joining me in studio today, hanging out on the show, is our Trailblazer insider from the Rose Garden Report, Sean Highkin. What's up, buddy?
I'm hoping I don't regret saying okay to spending more time with you, but
No, no, no. You might.
that's what I'm worried about. But we'll try it out. We'll see how it goes.
I'm worried about it every time someone spends time with me in studio because I understand now that I get older that, and you probably realize this, like we all have our own issues, right? It's
Right.
like there's some strengths I have, but then there's some weaknesses, and so I wonder as I get older, like how socially weird am I? So it's great. It's great to see you.
We've been seeing a lot of each other lately because I've been going to the up to section 330 during
Yes.
the pregame stuff, and we're going to do that again tomorrow, by the way, before the Spurs game.
Well, and what I like is, and you probably feel the same way, like even when you're talking to people from the team, whether it be the general manager or players or whatever, like talking to someone over the phone or interviewing someone over the phone is fine. But there's nothing like face to face, like
yeah.
regular human interaction. You and I are lucky. Like I'm older than you. I don't know how much older I am, but I would assume I'm older than you. But I'm just glad that we grew up in the generation before texting and social media became the deal because I still had to walk up to people to introduce myself. I had to walk up to girls to introduce myself. Like there was a lot of face to face type interaction. And so I just prefer that when we have time for it. But the problem is now we're busy. Like I'm even hesitant to call people on the phone for a phone conversation because I know the majority of people in my circle don't have time for, a 5 or 10 minute phone conversation. But that's why I like you because I can call you and you'll answer and then we can chat over the phone. It's just easier to do that than text sometimes.
I can't remember the last time, and this is probably terrible. I can't remember the last time I just call. I mean, you and I, it's a little bit of a different thing because we're coworkers, and so when you call me, it's usually about a work thing.
Yeah.
I can't remember the last time I've had just a friend that's not in my professional world. Just like a friend that I know outside of work, and I've just been like, oh, I'm just gonna call this person and just see how they're doing, and catch up. It's probably been. I mean, there was some of that going on during COVID because everybody was just stuck at home and everybody was lonely and everybody was like just wanting to reach out and talk to people. But since the last 2-3 years, whatever it's been, since the world has kind of gone back to normal post COVID,
Yeah.
just people just don't do that anymore.
Yeah, no doubt. No, it's weird. How difficult was COVID for you? Because you're built around covering the team and games and so forth. And then all of a sudden that's gone for a while.
Mhm.
Like, how did you manage that time for yourself?
I got out of it okay. It was, I mean, as far as like going, covering the team and stuff, like when they did have games again, I did go physically to the arena when we were allowed to, but it was the thing where like we sit totally isolated from everybody and all the media stuff is on Zoom. The thing I missed about that was the locker room stuff, which only came back a couple of years later, and then the stuff like because like the thing I love the most about this job, obviously I love basketball, I love writing the stuff or whatever. The thing I like the most is like just getting to talk to the people and being around people, and for 2 years of our lives, we weren't able to do that. The people I really felt bad for, though, I mean, I got out of it okay. The people I really felt bad for, though, was my parents because my dad retired. My dad was a physician. He was a doctor. His last day of work ever when he retired was January 15th, 2020.
Wow.
And he and my mom, as soon as he retired, he and my mom had a trip to New Zealand that they did. They got that one in, but they had all this other travel planned, and they were just like, now that he's not working anymore, my mom is not working, they were just going to do all this stuff, and they saved all this money. They're going to do all this stuff, and then my parents are older. My parents aren't going to have the whole rest of their lives to do that stuff. But so as soon as my dad retired and now doesn't have anything to do, it's 2 years of just can't do anything, can't go anywhere.
Do they live down in the Bay Area?
No, they live here.
Oh, they do?
No, my sister's partner's family was in the Bay Area. That's why they were down there for. But no, my parents live here.
Okay, good. So they've been able to reschedule some of those travel
Now
plans?
now that everybody's out of, we're past the worst of it.
That's cool.
Obviously, COVID is still a thing, but
I was wondering this about your job because I've talked to Peter Vesey about this numerous times, and what he found frustration with is things changed in the NBA. Like back in the old days, he had personal relationships with a lot of players
Uh-huh.
where, back then access to players was very easy. You would go in the locker room. He would go have dinner with players. He would get information, sometimes on the record or off the record, to
Mhm.
be able to write, his stories and so forth. And he enjoyed that connection. And as time went on, there's been more separation between the players and the
Yeah.
media, which has been difficult. But for you, when you go to a game, do you find that you get your best stuff for your stories that you're writing from the press conferences, like in the media room, or when you're getting those unique moments one on one with the player in the locker room? Where do you normally get your best stuff?
It's always born out of stuff in the locker room. It's not about, I mean, the stuff in the press conferences, like whenever, let's say they have their last home game was that loss against Utah. Like, obviously, Chauncey needs to get up there and, address it. And that's a press conference setting. That's, the appropriate place for the head coach to talk about a 40-point loss like that. But, you go into the locker room and, it's always fun to kind of see because, after a win, you go into the locker room and guys are joking around and talking and like making dinner plans and stuff. And it's just like, it's kind of light. But then you go into the locker room after a game like that one or some of these other losses, and it's a
Do
little
you
bit.
see a difference?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and you should see a difference. The guys shouldn't be like happy and like loose and joking around after they get destroyed like that. That's not what you. If it gets to that point, then it's a problem. But there's definitely you can always just tell and there's just like difference, like even aside from you talking to guys individually, like me and Justin Minaya, who he's not around all the time because he's a two-way guy, so he's with the remix sometimes. But his I am a Yankees fan. His dad is Omar Minaya, who is currently I forget what his job is, but he's in the Yankees front office. He was the GM of the Mets for a long time, and so like during the Yankees like World Series run, Justin and I would just like talk about the Yankees, or like I haven't talked to him since Juan Soto went to the Mets, but we've but like that's something that he and I have, or like Rayon Rupert, his since I have been doing a lot of reporting on the Portland WNBA expansion team, and so the WNBA is just something that I've been getting more into lately. And I don't know if you saw this, but his sister Ileana just was one of the 11 players that was picked by the Golden State Valkyries in their expansion draft. Her rights were held by Atlanta. She didn't play last year in the W because she was playing for the French women's national team.
Yeah.
But, I see Rayan and I'm like, oh, so your sister excited about Golden State? And we talked about that for a couple of stuff like that it's still like, to your point about, what stuff that Peter Vesey was telling you, obviously back in like the 80s and 90s, before social media and before there were so many media outlets, like the access was at a different level. And I've talked to Dwight about this many times because he's been in this for decades. But like, even now, even as it's gotten worse and worse as far as the access, there's still little pockets where you can actually form relationships with guys.
Yeah, I learned about his sister at rosegardenreport.com. You had a
Mhm.
piece up on it, and so I
Uh-huh.
read about it, and I didn't know until you had done that story. And so when I
Yeah.
read it, I was like, that's really cool, man. I
Uh-huh.
enjoy that. And I knew about Manaya's father. I think that's pretty neat, too. And
Yeah.
that's cool that he's, passionate about what his pops is doing in the
Yeah.
Yankees and so forth. That's a lot of fun. That had to been thrilling for him to see the Yankees in the World Series, knowing his dad was a part of that.
Yeah, and honestly, I was kind of kicking myself because I got this idea. I was gonna do a story where I was just talk to Justin about, seeing his dad in the, the team that his dad works for in the World Series. And, I'm cool with Justin. So like he would have talked to me about that. I got that idea in my head the night of the game where the Yankees got swept. And I was just like, as much as, I'm a Yankees fan, so I was like, I would like them to win and extend the series. But I was also just like, win one more game just so that it extends the series enough that I can see Justin again and talk to him about it for this story. So it's like,
Yeah.
you kind of, sometimes it's at the mercy of like, you think of this stuff too far, when it's too late. But
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes like that. Yeah.
Well, you probably have those situations all the time
All
where
the
you,
time.
you come up with a good idea, but you kick yourself because it didn't come up at the right time.
Right, or
'Cause
like
timing on a story is everything.
Right. Or like, I could have done this a week ago if I'd thought of this, or, like there's one tomorrow, like the Donovan Clingan, we'll get into this when we get into Blazer stuff, but it's seeming likely that Donovan Clingan is going to play tomorrow.
Well, let's talk about that
And-
right now. You were out at practice today. So Donovan Clingan is going to be listed as questionable, but he's been ramping up his work, right? So he's looking pretty good to go for tomorrow.
Yeah, we're gonna get the injury report at some point while we're on the air. So we'll get that. We'll get that live on the air. We'll break that live on the air. But yeah, Chauncey said today that Donovan is gonna officially be listed as questionable. And usually, when a guy who's been out for a while is listed as questionable on the injury report the day of the game, that usually means unless there's a setback, he's gonna go.
Good. So he'll go out there and do his normal work, and if he feels good, then he should probably play tomorrow.
Yeah, and from everything I've heard, Donovan. What I heard was that ever since the first week of the after the knee injury, it was like kind of bothering him a little. It was still bothering him. But since the first week, he's been kind of pain free. And even though they've been careful with not letting him do too much too early, they were able to ramp him up after. This is going to be about if he plays tomorrow, assuming he does, which I think he's going to. It's going to be about 3 weeks from the night he had the injury to when he plays again. After like a week and a half, he was just already ramping up and being allowed to do some, stuff. And then after the 2 weeks, he was cleared to do contact stuff. And so today he went through everything at practice. They practiced on Tuesday after they got back from LA, and he did everything. Chauncey said he looked good. I saw Donovan a few days ago at a remix game, and he seemed like he was in a pretty good mood. So, you know what? My takeaway from it is it must be nice to be 20.
Yeah, young, and, your body recovers at a different rate. But, I've asked you about this before. You told me that he's pretty much everything you expected him to be in his rookie season. All I can tell you that he's just been one of my favorite stories on the team so far this year. I've enjoyed watching him compete. I've enjoyed watching to see the way his teammates have embraced him. Obviously, coming from that culture at UConn has been very helpful for him. But I really believe this because a lot of guys will say it, and you know that some players don't mean it. But Donovan is really just all about whatever it takes to help this team win games. If that means I need to pull down 17 rebounds, I can do that. If you need me to go out there and really focus defensively and block 5 shots, I will make my effort to do that. Whatever you want him to do to help the team win, he's willing to embrace that. And every team needs a guy like that, but it's refreshing to see a young player with that type of attitude and approach. He's been a breath of fresh air. I like him.
Well, the fact that, I think probably their best win of the season was that win against Memphis where he got, or not against Memphis, against Houston where he got hurt. He had 19 rebounds in that game and 0 points. And he didn't seem like he was really losing any sleep over, I didn't score, I should have. He got 19 rebounds. That's what they needed from him. He's had other games that, one of those Minnesota, which the Minnesota game that he started.
On glass night.
Yeah, exactly. They may, glass night. Maybe Scoot will have a big night tomorrow against,
I hope so.
Against San Antonio.
Yeah, that was cool. The 19 rebound, no point night was incredible. And then in the locker room, when Brooke was interviewing him, they were saying 19, 19. They were chanting behind him, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, he's a pretty hard guy not to like as far as, personality-wise. He's just a nice kid, works hard, gets along with everybody.
Yeah, it's really perfect. I know the Blazers were excited to have access to him on draft night. And now you see him play, and you're like, he might be one of those players that we look back on a few years from now and be like, what a steal that was, right? Like one of those special nights where you get a guy and he turns out to be an absolute steal.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but the rest of the draft class was not really looking as bad as people thought. Like Zachary Risacher, the number 1 pick's been pretty good. Stephon Castle, his UConn teammate, going to be here with San Antonio tomorrow. He's been pretty good.
Yeah, it's good. All right, Sean Highkin in studio. He's going to be with me today. We will talk college football with Pete Fiutak at 4:20. We got more on the Blazers. We're going to talk about Bill Belichick, who's officially the head coach at North Carolina. I want to get Sean's thoughts on that. If you want to jump on board, 503-248-0620. I have a Blazers insider in studio, so if you got questions about the team, you can fire away and hit up Sean right now, 503-248-0620. You'll find me on social media at Chad and Rip City. You'll find Sean at Highkin. Michael Shacker's here. You got the Rip City Drive.
Uh-huh.
All right, I've already spent 15 minutes with Sean, and he's already impressing me. He just asked me a very important question. Have I seen the Yacht Rock documentary that was put together by Bill Simmons? It was terrific. Not as good as it could have been, but I'm a very big stickler when it comes to details. But what did you overall think of the product?
Well, I'm curious why you didn't think it was as good as it could have been.
Because the one guy that I wanted more involvement with is Jay Graydon, who was the longtime record producer and
Okay.
guitar player, and he worked with Steely Dan. I've watched lengthy YouTube videos with him, with Jay Graydon, and he's got all of these stories and details from all the different characters that were involved during that time in LA when all these artists were coming together in the same building to make music. And he's been trying to put together, like, find the right funding and people to get the right documentary together to do like an in-depth deal.
Uh-huh.
And so while the Simmons one was good, it could have been much better instead of just surface level stuff because I want him to dig a little bit deeper. Like Toto, for instance. Toto is a great band, and they were great individual session musicians who did work on the Thriller album, and they were paramount in that production. But their also influence is across so many different artists. And
Right. Like they all played on Thriller and stuff. Like,
yes, but it goes much deeper than that.
Mhm.
So I wanted it to go deeper, but I think for people who are just intrigued by the genre, I think that it would definitely a good doc. But I just love that. That era of music is my favorite. I grew up like a lot of people listening to what my parents were listening to, but as I've gotten older and I've gone to more concerts, I'll tell you what's great about YouTube, Sean, is it gives us access to all these different live performances, different videos, different interviews, where I can get stuck in a rabbit hole and pick up on details. Because what I want to know with an album is, I want to know how it came to be. I want to know the different artists that were a part of it. And I want to know the inspiration behind some of the songs. Like, I love to hear the stories behind the songs or the albums on how things came to be, which is fascinating to me.
Well, I'm sure you saw since this is kind of your wheelhouse, I'm sure you've seen the Asia making of the Steely Dan one. Right?
Yes.
Where they're like the part where they're like isolating Michael McDonald's backing vocals and having him talk about on Peg and having him talk about like how he came up with yeah, I love that kind of stuff too.
Like, McDonald is a high level musician, and even he couldn't believe what they were asking him to do in terms of vocals, right? Like, it was really difficult for him, but they were looking for a specific sound. And they went through multiple guitarists to come up with the right guitar solo for Peg until they came across Jay Graydon.
Right. But I think he probably didn't do this documentary or wasn't as involved in it because, and to your point, I didn't know that he was trying to fund his own documentary. He probably just wants to save all the good stuff for his own documentary.
That could
and
be it too.
That's why he wasn't. I did enjoy how the director of this documentary had in the documentary his phone call with Donald Fagen where he told Donald Fagen what he was doing and then he hung up on him.
Yeah, it's great. Here's what's interesting to me as well with like Steely Dan, and I didn't know this until recently, but that they didn't have like a regular band.
No, it was Donald Fagen and Walter Becker, and then it's just whatever session guys were they
Yes.
got. Yeah.
What they felt is that they had all these different ideas of how they wanted to create music. And so what they realized was best is like, instead of just having a set band, we'll just, every time we go to an album based on the concept and what we're trying to accomplish, we'll go out and bring in other musicians that will fit what we're trying to do. And it gave them the freedom to be able to do that.
Especially because for most of the time that they were active in the 70s, obviously, now since they're back to. I know that Walter Becker has passed away, but there still is a band called Steely Dan that tours. But
Yep.
I know that for the last 30 years or whatever, since they got back together, they've been a pretty heavy touring act, live act. But in the 70s, they pretty much didn't perform live for most of that time, and so when they were just making these albums in the studio, they weren't really worried about like, oh, how are we going to do? It's kind of like, once the Beatles stopped touring and their music got a lot more complex, but they also weren't touring. So they weren't worried about like, oh, how are we going to be able to do this live? How are we going to be able to recreate this? Because they were just like, we just want to do this in the studio. And then, we're not trying to play it live. So, who cares?
Yeah, that's why I love the like with Toto, Africa. It's their only number one hit. What's fascinating about the song is that it was kind of a throw-in. It was kind of the final song that was thrown onto Toto 4, and nobody on the band thought it was going to be much of anything, right? They thought it was kind of a joke of a song. And then all of a sudden it starts to get airplay, and it cruises straight to number one, and every single member of the band was completely blown away that song turned out to be a smash hit, their biggest hit to date. and a number one hit, and they didn't even see it coming. So a lot of times, even for band members, they think something's going to be good and it's not good. They think something's going to be awful and it turns out to be a smash hit. Even they can't always predict what's a hit and what's not a hit.
Well, you can't predict it. There are times where you write a song and you're just like, oh yeah, that's the one. That's
Yeah.
going to be, and you're right. But then, I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but I can't tell you how many interviews I've seen with people where they're talking about what their biggest hit is, and they're just like, wait, that one, really?
Yeah. So it's, man, that's so much fun.
You know what's another good music documentary that came out in the last month or so? I don't know if you've seen this, but it's on Netflix, but they just released a documentary on Elvis's 68 comeback special.
No, I have not
Have you-
seen it. Have you
it's-
seen that one, Shacker? Elvis's 68 comeback
I've seen
special?
parts of it.
Oh, parts
and
of
I
it?
knew that story. It was interesting.
It just came out like a month ago on Netflix. And the thing I liked, because there was another one about the 68 comeback special, it was more about like the special itself and the making of it and stuff. That I think that one was on like Paramount or something. It's hard to keep track of all these streaming services these days. But what I liked about this one is that it was just kind of going over everything that led up to the comeback special and just emphasizing like how irrelevant and how much of a joke Elvis was seen as in most of the 60s, because after he got huge in the 50s, he went into the army. And so he was kind of off the grid for a couple of years. And then when he came back, like the Beatles and Bob Dylan and everything else was kind of going on. And, Elvis's manager at that point was just pushing him to make terrible movies, and he wasn't even really doing music. And so people kind of thought he was a has-been. And so that's why he wanted to do the special. But there was this one part. I did not realize that his wife, Priscilla, is still alive.
Yeah.
But there's a new interview with her in it. And they play a clip of when doing one of these terrible movies that Elvis was making. He's like sitting on the back of a tractor with a lady singing Old MacDonald Had a Farm.
Yeah.
And it was just and they cut to Priscilla, and she is just like disgusted that they made Elvis do that instead of letting him do music like he wanted to. But it was,
Gosh.
if you want one, it's like 90 minutes long. I think it just came out like a month ago on Netflix.
Oh,
So
good.
that's a good one to check out.
No, I will. I'll check it out because I'm fascinated by Elvis too.
I am too. I don't even really like that much of his music, but his career and his life is so fascinating.
It really is. I remember when I used to live in Denver when I was younger. We would drive by. One of his houses is there in the Denver area, so we would drive by it and always take a look at the house and stuff. But what fascinates me about Elvis is, like a lot of the big acts from that era, like the influence that he had, much like the Beatles. Like he had a massive influence. This is why, like with the Beatles, for example, like they're not my number one favorite, but I acknowledge
Sure.
and recognize them as the greatest band of all time in the simple way, aside from the songwriting and the fact that McCartney and Lennon never wrote a bad song, which is phenomenal. And they've got more number ones than just about anybody.
Right.
I think they still have more number ones than anyone. So the success is there, but I look at the influence, right?
Mhm.
Like how many people that we grew up listening to started getting into music and wanting to play an instrument or be a songwriter because of the Beatles. The influence they had across the board was significant. And if you talk to anyone from that era, like I've interviewed Steve Lukather from Toto before,
Yeah.
like the influence the Beatles had on him were paramount, just like a lot of the artists back then.
Yeah.
They got into it because of Lennon and McCartney. They were blown away by what they heard.
Yeah. Something I learned about Elvis recently that I found pretty interesting and I guess surprising. As huge as he was here, he never in his life performed anywhere outside of the United States.
He didn't?
Ever, because his manager was an undocumented immigrant, and his manager was terrified of getting caught or getting his papers flagged or whatever if they traveled outside of the country. So Elvis never in his entire life performed outside of the U.S. because of that.
Wow.
I know.
That's a major wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Because the Beatles, on the other hand, like they didn't really, they felt like until they had a number one song in the U.S. that they hadn't fully arrived.
right. Did you see the new Disney? There's a new one on Disney Plus about the Beatles' first 64 American tour, but that just came out like a couple weeks ago too. That one's also good.
Oh my goodness! I also heard. I think it might have been a McCartney interview, but I didn't know the details until a few months ago when I heard this interview of Sergeant Pepper and the whole idea behind that concept. Where this is fascinating to me, but like everyone in the band had different. Like a lot of artists, they had desires to do different types of music, but because you're the Beatles and there's a certain expectation once you become big, then you're the record producers and the people
Right.
around you. They don't want you to venture off into some category where people won't recognize the music. So what they came up with was a concept called Sergeant Pepper's,
Where they just pretended to be
a different person.
Right.
So they had conversations amongst the band members where it's like, hey, no, you're not John Lennon. You're such and such. And they came up with different names so they could go, when they walked in studio, they didn't think of themselves as their own self. They thought of themselves as different people. So it would give them the freedom to create and act accordingly. Like to me, that is genius because it allowed them with the concept to put out music they hadn't done before because they were acting as somebody else. Like that's wild.
But also, I feel like at that point, that was what, 67 that record came out. Like at that point, I feel like the Beatles were big enough that I don't think if they turned in that same record without the concept, I don't think the record company would have pushed back too much on it.
Yeah,
They would
because
have
they
been
were
like,
big enough.
we can, there's literally nothing they could have put out with that wouldn't have gone.
Yeah. So but isn't that cool though?
I mean, it's creative.
Yeah. So what do you find for yourself now? Do you listen like in your wheelhouse when you're listening to music? Do you find yourself listening to older music, or do you find yourself listening to music from today?
Kind of both. Like I still kind of, I like you said, people grow up listening to what their parents listen to. So, I kind of grew up on all this stuff, but I get into, kind of more recent stuff too. No, I'm pretty all over the place.
All over the place. Yeah. For me, what I like to do now is, Shacker was mentioning the deep cuts, and there's a, yacht rock deep cut station I like to listen to. But what I like to do is I like to go back to albums that I enjoyed when I was younger or albums that came before my time. But then what I do is I like to listen to the B side. Like I go through and, because normally I would just go and whatever songs were on the radio, those are the ones that I'd focus on. But now that I'm older, I go through and listen to all the songs. And now I'm discovering songs that never listened to before that have been out for decades. But to me, they're a brand new song because I'm discovering them for the first time. Like that's one of my favorite ways to spend time is to discover old music that I've never heard before that is technically new music because I'm hearing it for the first time.
Well, I'm always so interested to see kind of how other people do that because I'm somebody like I don't listen to the radio. I don't listen to music radio or playlists or anything. I pretty much only listen to full albums, whether, for whoever I'm listening to. But it's always so interesting to me to hear, friends talk about like, oh yeah, I heard that song on one of these Spotify playlists or, one of these playlists. And it's always interesting to me, like whether people like use kind of the algorithmic playlist that these streaming platforms put up, which I guess can be like a way to discover. It's kind of replacing what is on, used to be just you turn on the radio and you hear something before, all the music radio stations just got so, homogenized where it wasn't, this DJ is playing this song because they like the song, everybody gets a certain playlist and they have to, adhere to it.
What's cool about that is that nowadays in radio stations, like a DJ, like they don't set a playlist, right? It's the algorithm, the computers, like the playlist is already set, and then they come in and they do their DJing, and the songs that are going to play are the ones that are going to play. But I remember Craig Walker, who was the longtime DJ on K103, and he was like, Mr. Portland Radio for years. Even up until the very end in his contract, he had it written so that he could still play music that he wanted to play off of feel, right?
Yeah.
So based off of feel, based off of the mood, based off of what was being discussed on the show, that he would have the freedom to be able to pick songs accordingly. And to me, that's a talent too, is to be able to pick songs based off of feel and based on what the show is going on to kind of fit that.
I'm also more likely to want to check something out if somebody that I know or a real person says, hey, this is good, you should check this out, than just, this algorithm or whatever market research says that that we should play this at this time so that the most people are going to respond to it so that we get a rating. Like I get that. Like that's, what corporate, radio is at this point. But I'm much more if I were like listening to a music that somebody recommends, I'm much more likely to be interested in it if it's an actual person that's telling me I should listen to something.
Well, I think that's true. Even when it comes to like certain movies,
anything
like movies, like it's one of those things where I've gone through and looked at the reviews before I go to see a movie. And based on the reviews, I'm like, should I even be wasting my time on this? And then I go to watch the movie, and I'm like, that was phenomenal.
Right. And it's like, you don't know of like these movie reviews, especially on like Rotten Tomatoes. Now that like the AI stuff is everywhere, were these reviews even written by a real person? Was this person paid to write this review? Was this AI? Like, I'm much more likely to be interested in something if somebody I know tells me I should check it out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that for sure. All right, Sean Highkin is in studio. And he's our Trailblazers insider. He's hanging out with me for the day. In case you're just joining us, he got word from Coach Billups that it looks like Donovan Clingan very likely to possibly play tomorrow against San Antonio, which is great. And then Robert Williams close to returning off of the concussion protocol.
We'll see. I mean, he went through practice. So the way that is now is he went through practice today.
Yeah.
He still has to clear one more test. I guess I don't know the full ins and outs of it, but I guess for the NBA's concussion protocol, they have this test that they give you, a computer based thing, basically just to make sure you're fully cognizant of stuff. And he's been taking those every day to kind of assess, what level he's at, and those have been going well, but there's just, they have to have a new checkpoint every day, and so he has to hit that checkpoint. And if he hits that checkpoint today, then they think he would be good to go tomorrow. And Chauncey said today that if the doctors tell him he can play tomorrow, he's going to play him tomorrow.
Okay, I've got another basketball question for you. What's the latest with Jimmy Butler? Does he, in fact, want to trade? Has he requested a trade? What's going on with Jimmy Butler?
The whole situation has been very amusing to me for a lot of reasons. I think I saw that his agent, Bernie Lee, went at Shams Charania pretty hard on Twitter and accused him of writing his stuff on ChatGPT. My kind of outside read of that whole thing, as somebody who, I don't know Jimmy's agent. I know Jimmy pretty well because I covered him in Chicago. I haven't talked to him in years, but just then, I know how this thing works. My read on how that all went down is that Jimmy had his agent put out feelers to certain teams that he was interested in maybe getting traded to. And that what they got back was that there's probably not a whole lot of interest in teams giving up real stuff for a 35-year-old Jimmy Butler who wants a new contract and has the injury history that he has. And so because they're getting this blowback, now Jimmy's agent is trying to put that on Shams as a way of doing damage control. But, I mean, it seemed – and I actually kind of think it's funny. Somebody said this to me yesterday, and I think it's a good point. I think the rumor about Jimmy maybe getting traded to the Warriors is good for everybody. The rumor. Not because I think it's going to happen, because if I had to guess, I think Jimmy doesn't get traded before the deadline. But basically – the Warriors being connected to them, just like, remember over the summer, they were like connected to Lauri Markkanen and They were trying to get Paul George. They get to go to their fans and they get to go to Steph Curry and say, hey, see, look, we tried to get you another star. We tried to get you a guy. And then the Heat get to say, we explored it, but, we're not going to just trade away our guy for nothing. We're not worried about it. So they get to do that. And then Jimmy, if he stays in Miami, that's probably his best chance to actually get his money this summer. So I think this news cycle being the way it is kind of the best thing for everybody.
Well, what do you know about the team side there? Does Miami still want Butler?
I think they would be happy to keep Jimmy. I don't think they want to keep him It's kind of the same thing as what's happening with New Orleans and Brandon Ingram. It's not that they want him gone. It's that he wants the absolute most money they can get. And with this new CBA being so limiting for teams with high payrolls, and if you're paying a guy max money, you better know that you're getting max production from him. And, is that what Jimmy is at this point in his career? Maybe, maybe not. So I think they'd like to keep him, but I think they'd like to keep him at a different number than what he wants.
That makes sense. So there's no rift between Butler and coach or Butler and Pat Riley. It's just he wants max dollars. And they probably don't want to pay him max dollars because of where he's at in his career. That makes sense.
That's exactly it. I mean, that's what's going on with Brandon Ingram, too. I don't think the Pelicans are just like, we hate this guy. We want him gone. We're just going to unload him.
He's a great player, but not available all the time.
And it's also, we're starting to see a little bit of a market correction where, you've seen like how the Bulls are trying to unload Zach LaVine's contract and nobody wants to take it. And Zach LaVine's a really good player and he's having a really good year this year. So it's not even like he's not a valuable player, but it's just with this new CBA, with these new rules and being so restrictive, if you're paying a guy that much money, you better be getting the production of like Jokic or Giannis or Luka or one of these. I think we're kind of going to get back to a place where, over the next couple of years, as teams kind of grapple with the ramifications of it, the top, 10 guys in the league, the Jokic's and the Giannis's and the SGA's and, the Anthony Edwards, like those types of guys are going to get the absolute max money. And then the guys kind of in the tier of a Zach LaVine or a Brandon Ingram are going to get a little bit less than the max.
That's interesting. So that's why I don't understand. I'll ask you about Denver next because I don't understand how they can pay Jokic, Michael Porter Jr., Jamal Murray, and Aaron Gordon that type of money. And maybe we're seeing the impact of that right now. We'll get to that next. Sean Highkin is with us. I will talk college football with Pete Futak coming up at 4:20. But if you want to jump on board, you can do so, 503-248-0620. The Blazers back in action tomorrow against the Spurs, Wemby and the Spurs. And that tip-off will be at 7. So if you're on hold, stay there. We'll get to your phone calls next. Sean Highkin Our Trailblazers insiders in studio with us today on the Rip City Drive. All right, telephone number is 503 248 0620. 503 248 0620. If you want to jump on board, you can do so. I had mentioned the Nuggets before we went to break. They're paying four players a ton of money. Aaron Gordon just got the new deal. Obviously, Jokic making big money, Jamal Murray, and Michael Porter Jr. So, how does that work in today's NBA for the Nuggets to where you can pay those four guys, but yet have enough funds to be able to flesh out the roster around them and have depth?
Well, we kind of saw the consequences of that over the summer because Contavious Caldwell Pope, who was one of the most important
Critical.
supporting guys on the title team in 23, they let him. They had to let him walk because Orlando offered him more money than they felt comfortable paying him. Because then once you get into being in the second apron, then it's not even it's the thing that I think a lot of fans don't understand about this is when we talk about like the luxury tax and the second apron and all this stuff. It's not just a matter of, oh, the owner is cheap. The owner doesn't want to write a check for a luxury tax because all these owners can afford to write a check for the luxury tax. But there's all these restrictions on, like, if a team is in the second apron salary wise, like where, Milwaukee is in there, Phoenix is in there, a couple other teams are in there.
Yeah.
They can't combine two players to send out to match salary. They can only trade one for one.
Yeah.
They can't take back slightly more money in a trade than they send out. There's all this stuff that makes it like materially more difficult to build a roster. It's not just a matter of, oh, the owner's cheap. The owner doesn't want to pay for the luxury tax. There's like real restrictions that they just, that teams have to adhere to. And so, there are some owners like Steve Ballmer with the Clippers or Matt Ishbia with the Suns or Joe Lacob with the Warriors that are like, we don't care. We'll pay whatever. And we'll live with the consequences. But this stuff's a real concern for, these front offices that are trying to build a roster, especially when you have a guy as good as Jokic. You want to maximize what you can do while that guy is still as good as he is.
And he's still the best player in the NBA, right?
He is.
Yeah.
But it's like if you're paying him and they just gave Jamal Murray that extension this summer, and Jamal Murray so far hasn't been what they thought he was going to be, which maybe they could have seen that coming because he looked like he wasn't really himself in the Olympics when he was playing for Canada.
That's true.
But, you got him, you got Michael Porter, you got Aaron Gordon, and then we're starting to see like they're looking at making upgrades, but like how much can they even really do? Because it's not like any of the other guys on their roster besides those four are going to have much value. So it's like if you're not going to trade one of those guys, and if you do want to trade one of those other guys besides Jokic, that's a lot of salary. We were just talking about the thing with Jimmy is that's a lot of salary for people to send out and be able to even just make a trade work legally because so many of these teams are hamstrung by these new things with the new CBA.
Yeah, that's true. All right, Sean Hyken is with us. Let's go out to the phones. We have another Sean that wants to chime in, Sean and Sandy. Hey, Sean, before you get to basketball real quick, who's your pick to win the national championship in college football?
Baby.
Who?
Oregon Ducks.
All right, you got Oregon.
Yeah, and I'm glad that, they finally made these stipulations, on the trades where you can't trade like 3 or 4 junk players for one decent player. That's because now it's finally starting to level out a little bit better. It's a good player for a good player.
And did you have a question on the Blazers, my friend?
I do. It's getting frustrating. We're sitting here for a few years now, just kind of treading water and mediocrity and like bottom of the barrel. And I don't see anything really changing until we get new ownership. I'm just wondering when anybody thinks that might happen and who that might be. And I'll let you guys talk about that. Have a great day, brother.
All right, appreciate that. How often do you, from your readers and people you interact with, fans, how often do you get a comment like that in regards to ownership and where the Blazers are at right now?
Not as often as you'd think. Like that's you would think it would be a constant thing. I get it. I hear it once in a while, but maybe part of it is that, I don't look at my mentions on Twitter as much as I used to, so I don't really see a lot of that stuff. But I think that the ownership thing is going to be at least another few years. My sense of the whole thing has always been that because the team has to be sold at some point. That's in Paul Allen's trust. The team eventually has to be sold. All of his assets have to be sold, and the money has to go to charity.
Yep.
But as far as I know, there's no timeline on it as far as like it has to be sold by X date or all of his assets have to be liquidated by X date. Now, they've started to sell some of his stuff. They sold his art collection. They sold Cinerama. They've sold some of his real estate stuff. They've sold a couple of his yachts. They've started selling some of his stuff. They haven't sold the Blazers or the Seahawks yet. And I think I can't really speak to the Seahawks. I don't know a ton about that situation. But my sense with the Blazers situation is that they want to wait until a couple things. They got the TV deal, which got done. That happened.
That was a big deal. $77 billion deal NBA got in place. With
Yeah, so you want to get
partner.
your piece of that. And then the other thing is that because they're going to do expansion in a couple of years, it's going to be Seattle and Vegas. So that's two teams. And let's say that's $5 or $6 billion each that come in as far as, what the price is.
Wasn't there a recent valuation on the Blazers? What are they valued at right now? Like $5 billion?
Something like that.
Yeah.
All these franchises.
It's a big number. Yeah.
All these franchises are through the roof. I mean, you can now understand why when Phil Knight offered $2 billion, they were like, "Nah, we're good. We don't want to sell it for that." But
and what did Paul originally pay? Like $80 million?
Something like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's at the very least, it's not going to be until expansion happens that we start to hear about the Blazers getting sold.
And are you hearing the same things that have been out there that Seattle, Vegas are the next two likely expansion spots?
Yeah, that's
a done deal, pretty much.
It's nice that Adam Silver is saying that Mexico City is a possibility, that they haven't even started narrowing down the short list of candidates and stuff. But yeah, it's Seattle and Vegas.
Okay, that's cool. So Seattle and Vegas will be the spots. Now, with the Trailblazers, like how would you describe? Because rarely does a team come out and say, "Hey, we're going through a massive rebuild, and that's what we're trying to do." Most teams won't say that. But how would you describe what the Blazers are trying to accomplish right now? Where are they at in this timeline, and what exactly would you call it? A rebuild, or how would you describe it?
Well, it's absolutely a rebuild right now. And I think it's one of these things where it feels like it's been a longer rebuild than it maybe has been, because this is the second season of the actual rebuild, because, they traded Dame before the start of last season. And that's, once you trade that guy, then it's, there's no ambiguity about, okay, no, we're rebuilding. This is what they're doing. They're trying to be bad. They're trying to get a good draft pick. The 2 seasons before that, they came into the season wanting to make the playoffs, and then once it became clear that wasn't going to happen, they pivoted. So it feels like it's year 4 of a rebuild, even though it's actually only year 2 of a rebuild.
Exactly. I think what the problem is, too, is that if you go back to the year after the trip to the Western Conference Finals, there was a lot of hope going into that season, and then you had the early injury to Zach Collins, and then shortly thereafter, Rodney Hood got hurt. And so that started the domino effect to where – so you go all the way back to like 2019, 2020, where they weren't rebuilding, but the injuries caused other problems, which didn't lead to the success that people hope. And I think everyone just kind of lumps everything in together over the last 5 or 6 years.
Well, that was the summer where Neil traded for Hassan Whiteside and signed Mario Hezonja, and then said this is the deepest team we've ever had in the Dame era. And then 2 years later, he also said that the season where they signed Cody Zeller and Tony Snell, and that was their whole offseason, that was the deepest team of the Dame era also. So it's just been a whole lot of, and this is going to be a very interesting next 12 months with the Blazers. Well, I'll tell you this as far as like timeline for it. I think they would like it if this was the last year that they're doing this.
Yeah.
Especially if, let's say they get really lucky and they get the number 1 pick and they end up getting to take Cooper Flagg, or even if they get the number 2 pick and they get like Dylan Harper. If they get one of these top guys in the draft, I think the focus at that point is going to shift from, okay, we got to be bad for 2 more years to get 2 more draft picks. I think once they get a guy that they feel like is their, guy that they're building around the centerpiece, whoever that is, Cooper Flagg, whoever, then I think they're going to be like, okay, let's go. Let's try to, get back in the playoffs this year.
All right, we'll have more on that coming up next. And then we're going to hear from Bill Belichick at his introductory press conference at the University of North Carolina, and Pete Futek at 420. It's pretty awesome, man. We got Sean Highkin in studio, and we're going to continue to chat it up. 503-248-0620 is your telephone number. You got the Rip City Drive. is this a song? Yeah. What's the title of it? Yeah. All right, this song right here is called "Breaking the Tape," and it was so cool because a couple of weeks ago, the night before I came into work, I had discovered this playlist on YouTube that had all these great sports themes that I grew up with, being a big sports viewer. And I told Shacker I came across the list. He goes, "Oh, I've been looking for this song." I'm like, "I bet you I can find it." He's, "I've been looking for decades. There's no way." And within 10 minutes, I found it and sent it over to him. You're pretty happy about that, aren't you, Shacker?
Yeah, I sung this song to a production guy.
And he had no idea what you were talking about.
Yeah, he's like, if you sing it to me, maybe I could find it. But I think he was playing a joke on me.
All right, Sean Hykins in studio hanging out with me. Like when you were younger, Sean, when you were like little Sean, what was your sport? Was NBA your sport of choice? Yeah. So what were your players? Who were your guys that you grew up on?
Brian Grant, Rasheed Wallace, Damon Stoudemire. That Blazer team.
That
like
Blazer
late
team.
90s, early 2000s.
Oh, man, I love that. Brian Grant was awesome, and I still love him, man. That's a cool guy. He was a tough SOB.
Yeah.
I love some of the stories that he's told me, too. He told me once that he was like in a game, and there's like a loose ball, and he dives on the floor like you would expect Brian Grant to do.
Uh-huh.
And he's going for the ball, and all of a sudden he feels like this really strong guy ripped the ball out of his hands. And Brian said, "I was about ready to throw, and then I look over my shoulder, and it was Charles Oakley." He was like,
And you're just like, nope, not gonna do that.
"We're good here." And then he told me that they were in meetings down in Vegas. Like, they have the off-season meetings, and there's a bunch of players in one, like, like those, I don't know what you call them, but like like one of those big, like, meeting rooms, or what do they have at these, a conference center.
Yeah.
And so they're in there, and a bunch of players are in there. So, and they're all sitting down waiting until the meetings get involved. And so Charles Barkley is one of the guys sitting back. He's leaning back in his chair at one of the tables, holding court like you'd expect Charles to do. And all of a sudden, Brian said he looked over, and Charles Oakley walked right over to where Charles was sitting, leaning back in his chair, open hand slapped Charles, knocked him back in his chair, and stood over him and says, "If you ever say anything about me to another woman," he goes, "I'm going to kick your ass." He turned around and walked out, and that was that. But like Oakley was like the one guy where Brian Grant, and you know what guy's tough? If Brian Grant kind of gives you the nod of the cap, that's when you know you're a tough dude.
Have you ever read the book about the 90s Knicks, the Chris Herring book?
Yes.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah.
That was a tough team.
Yeah.
But that's the era I grew up with. In fact, I was going to ask you about this, where I noticed, I saw the reports, NBA viewership year to year, like with the NBA Cup is down like 10%. Viewership on ESPN games is down like 22% year over year. The lowest rated finals over the last like 30 years has been the last 4 years. And so I was trying to figure out, like, there's a variety of different reasons for why people may or may not be watching, more or less basketball. So I tried to think about myself. And you know what I discovered for myself with the NBA? Like, I love watching the Blazers. And, of course, I was a Blazer fan growing up. But what I've noticed for myself, when I was younger, each era I had different individual stars that I enjoyed watching, that I would go out of my way to watch.
Right.
So we're talking about guys like Larry Bird, who was my favorite, Michael Jordan, Isaiah Thomas, Kobe Bryant. Huge fan of Kobe. Didn't like the Lakers, but I loved Kobe. And so throughout my life, I had all these different stars. And then Dame, I was a huge Dame fan and enjoyed watching him and would go out of my way, even on nights when I wasn't covering the game at the arena, to watch him because I wanted to watch Dame play basketball. But now I don't have a strong connection to some of the stars that are in the league. So for me, that's why maybe I won't watch as much basketball around the league outside of Portland, because I don't have a connection to like a star player like I would with, Kobe or some of those others. But what do you notice for you as time has gone on? Are you still watching as much basketball as you ever have and enjoying it as much as you ever have?
I'm still watching quite a bit, but I definitely think that the dynamic is different now. I wonder, there's a few things. One is like I always get kind of annoyed with the rating stuff, because it's like, unless you work for the league office or you're an executive at one of the TV networks, there's no reason for fans to care about the TV ratings. Like, I saw a bunch of stuff last night after in the NBA Cup when the Warriors and the Knicks both lost their matchups. I saw a whole bunch of stuff from fans and media people on Twitter where it was like, man, the NBA has to be so mad that the Knicks and the Warriors didn't get in. This is going to be a disaster for ratings. And I'm just like, why do you care? You're not seeing any of the TV money from the ratings. And also, like, the league got their TV deal, so it's fine. But I think the two things I would say is, one, there's just so much more stuff to watch now. It's not like, except for football's the one sport, whether, college or pro, football is the one sport that seems like it's just completely
It's
immune to
continuing to
this. And it's
grow.
just going to keep getting more and more popular. Anything else, like the NBA, baseball is a pretty much totally regional sport at this point, and yet the money just keeps going up and up and up in baseball too. Or, whatever else. It's like there are some things that, whether it's, some, music that would be like the biggest thing in the world that everybody's talking about, or some movie that everybody in the world has seen. There's just so much more stuff now that, like, unless you're already into the NBA, there's not going to be a thing where, like, every single person in America is watching this NBA game, because there's just so much more stuff to watch.
What do you think about the style of the game with the number of three-point shots that are being put up? Do you like the style of play in today's game?
It's not my favorite, but I also don't think it's like gonna, I don't think it's like this. This stuff is all cyclical. Like, I think it's gonna come back around at some point. Like, once they've maxed out the efficiency of what that is, then there'll be some rule change to change that. Like, this stuff is all gonna come back around at some point.
Do you think the league might look at some way to limit three-point attempts during the course of games?
I've heard that thrown out before. I think once you do that, I think it gets a little bit too gimmicky, and it also gets into like what's going to happen in the moment in a game when the team takes another 3-pointer and it's just too, and it's like, oh, well, we're one over our limit, so what are they going to, like, how's that going to work? I think that's a little bit too overthinking.
Yeah, it's kind of like the golden bat rule
Oh,
of baseball.
I saw something about that.
That's
too.
a little too gimmicky for my taste.
That's when it gets into like, okay, this is a kind of fun idea to talk through and talk about, but like in an actual game when it's like happening in the moment, like none of this stuff is like this isn't going to make it better. This is just going to be a new thing for people to complain about.
Yeah, and very interesting. Yeah, it's a different game. I mean, different from what we grew up with. I mean, if you go back, like if you and I were to sit down and watch a game from the 90s, and then we sat down and watched a game from today's game, like back to back, it does look like a significantly different game.
It's two different sports.
Yeah.
Like the final scores of some of these finals games would be like in the 60s or 70s, which is what a team scores in a half now.
I know. Look at the look at the World Championship Boston Celtics. They're putting up threes at an incredible level. I think through 16 games or whatever the number was, they'd already put up more threes than like the 92 Bulls or something like that.
Right, and I think what's good is when there's a bunch of different teams that play different ways. Like, there was this time, like right after the Warriors first blew up, that everybody started trying to play like the Warriors and started to play the same style. And it's like, you can't do that because you don't have the two greatest shooters of all time and one of the most unique, versatile, defensive, undersized fives who's also a point guard. Like, you can only do that if you have Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Draymond Green and Kevin Durant. Like, you can't play like that. I think we're kind of starting to now get back to where, like, yeah, there's a team like the Celtics that shoot a ton of threes, but then there's a team like the Cavs that, plays two true bigs. And then, you got
having great success.
Right. Or, you look at, what Orlando is doing where, they don't have a ton of shooting. They have, they play a different way. And, all these teams that are good are playing different, the Knicks are kind of more of a, old school, with Tibbs, they're kind of more of like that physical, tough thing. Like, and then you have Jokic, who's totally unlike anybody. Like, there, as long as there's just variety of like different ways that teams play.
Well, even last year in the playoffs, how about Minnesota?
Yeah,
using two bigs in Cat and Rudy Gobert, and then they had Ant, who was their star player, but they played a different style of basketball.
Right, which is why I think it's kind of oversimplifying it when people say, "Oh, everybody just shoots all these threes now." It's like, yeah, there's a lot of that, but it's not everything.
Yeah, that's true. All right, so real quick, going back to the Blazers. So basically, in a rebuild right now.
Yeah.
And the hope would be that they secure one of the top 3 picks in the upcoming draft. And then if that happens, let's say that they just hit the jackpot and you get Cooper Flagg. Well, then all of a sudden, you then shift your focus from rebuild to coming out of that, and then you're trying to shape your team to start winning, right? That's how the process would work?
I think that would be the plan. And it's kind of to the point where now it's sort of because of this new CBA and because of how restrictive it is and some of the stuff that we talked about before, it's kind of like in the NFL when let's say you draft, a Patrick Mahomes or, Josh Allen or one of these, generation, one of these like franchise quarterbacks. You want to win while they're still on their rookie contract before you have to pay them what you have to pay them after they've been in the league for a few years. So if they get Cooper Flagg, And I mean, the Spurs are kind of going through it right now. They're paying Wemby like $10 or $12 million a year. And once, in a couple of years when he's up for his max, by that point, he might be making like $70 or $80 million a year or whatever it is when the salary cap is, wherever the salary cap is by then. And then they'll have a lot less of, and obviously you have to pay him that because he is who he is and you have to pay to keep those types of guys. But then you're going to have so much less flexibility to add other guys around him. And so it might become more of a thing where once you get one of those guys, it becomes an incentive to win right away or, be good right away, not because you're worried that guy is going to leave in a couple of years because you have more years where you can pay him, but because you want to be able to do other stuff and maximize other stuff before you got to pay that guy.
Now, is there any pressure or urgency on Cronin to where he's got guys on the roster he needs to move by the deadline this year?
I mean, not needs to because none of the veterans are expiring. But I think we're kind of starting to see, especially as teams grapple with this new CBA, and it becomes harder to move some of these bigger salaries. Waiting out the market might not necessarily be the way to get the most value. So when you look at guys like Jeremy Grant or Anthony Simons, who I think are the two guys that are going to probably come up the most between now and the deadline, like this past summer, Joe, they talked about, Jeremy Grant with different teams, like the Lakers were interested in him, and the price was what the price was, and no team was really meeting the price. At a certain point, waiting it out longer is maybe not going to lead to the team meeting the price. So maybe I think a couple of those guys, it would be probably in their best interest to move before.
Who do you think on the roster contending teams before the deadline would have the most interest in? Would it be Grant and Robert Williams? Tease, or who are the guys that other teams you think would have the most interest in right now?
Well, Jeremy Grant, I think, is the most clean-cut one because you know what he is. He doesn't have the – I mean, with Rob, I mean, I think if teams knew Rob was going to be healthy, then obviously Rob would have the most value. But if the Blazers knew Rob was going to be healthy, I don't think they would be even open to trading him. But, I think because of the health stuff, that's a little bit of a mitigating thing with Rob, which is why I think they might just keep him after the deadline. But I think Jeremy Grant is probably the most obvious one that is going to have a market before the deadline and they would be able to trade, and it doesn't make sense to keep necessarily. And if you ask me what one guy before the deadline I think is going to get moved, I think it would be Jeremy.
So Jeremy Grant.
Yeah.
Do you think the Lakers still have interest in Grant?
Sure. I haven't heard that they don't. I think he'd be a good fit there. It's just a matter of, what are they willing to do as far as draft capital? Because it's not like with some of these other teams, like if they could offer, because one thing about this front office is, and you saw it with the trade for Denny Avdia, where they, instead of trading Malcolm Brogdon and just getting back a mediocre first round pick and salary filler, they traded Brogdon plus a couple of picks for Denny Avdia because that was a young guy that they think still has another level to reach and is on a good contract and fit with what they were doing. If the Lakers had somebody like that they could throw into a trade, then I think that would be something that the Blazers would be interested in. But all the salary that the Lakers would have to send back to match would be like D'Angelo Russell and Rui Hachimura or Gabe Vincent or some of these guys that would just be kind of names attached to contracts. And so because of that, I think there may be more of an ask as far as the draft capital.
Okay, that makes sense. Sean Highkin is with us. All right, when we come back, we'll talk college football with Pete Fiutak. I want to get his take on Belichick taking over at North Carolina. We'll get his take on the first-round matchups. Will any of these underdogs, like SMU or Boise or Arizona State, will they surprise in the playoff? Pete Fiutak, College Football News, is coming up next. And Sean Highkin going to hang out for the show, which is cool. You got the Rip City Drive. Tomorrow, the Trailblazers will host the Spurs. Tip-off from Moda Center at 7. I'll have the Rip City Drive live from Moda at 3. And then Chris Burkhardt will have Blazers Game Day at 5. It's presented by Coors Light. All right, joining us now on the Rip City Drive is the man behind college football news. He writes, he publishes, he does it all. He's a guru, and he joins us once again. It's Pete Fiutak. You can follow him on social at Pete Fiutak. Pete, it's great to have you back on the show. I need your reaction to Bill Belichick taking over at North Carolina.
All right, fine. They'll be like 7-5, 9-3. They'll be good. They'll be competent. It's not like he's going to step in and be Saban at Alabama. I mean, he's too old for that. I mean, he can't build. There's just not enough time. I mean, not to say you can't do stuff like coaching when you're in your late 70s, early 80s. But this is about the transfer portal. This is about bringing in talent. And there's going to be the assumption that, well, it's Bill Belichick. Who doesn't want to play for him? Everyone's just got to remember that every 16-year-old kid that they're going to be calling has no clue who he is. So it's just about the NIL money still. And if North Carolina wants to offer more than other schools, then they're going to get the talent.
See, that's a great point. The young kids that you call to recruit, you and I know Bill Belichick. We understand his success and his 6 Super Bowls, but a lot of these youngsters, they did not grow up with Bill as head coach of New England.
Think about it. I mean, like, who's Tom Brady to these kids? I mean, maybe if you're, you kind of maybe remember him at Tampa Bay at the end, or, you remember him when he was at the end, but, that's, you were talking, 6 years ago since he won a Super Bowl? Is that too long? Maybe it was earlier than that, but still, it's obviously Tom Brady and Bill Belichick still have big names, and they do matter, but it never really translates like I think the pro guys think they do. They kind of assume that I coached in the NFL. That's going to carry all the weight. But, obviously Pete Carroll was amazing, but Pete Carroll was also like, I want to say 48-ish when he took over at USC, whole different thing. And from Lovie Smith to, Dave Wanstead to, on and on and on. It doesn't necessarily translate that just because you're a former NFL head coach with a lot of success in the NFL doesn't necessarily mean you're going to rock it in college.
We're talking with Pete Fiutak, college football news. Now, I have heard that Coach Prime at Colorado does not fly around and, he's not on the recruiting trail 100% of the time. I mean, based on what you know, can you build a program without your head coach being out on the recruiting trail if you have the right team?
It depends on what you're recruiting. I mean, again, we have to kind of remember that the game has completely changed. The idea of, all right, we're going to get this 114-pound kid, put him in a weight room for 4 years, and then by his junior year, he's going to be a 325-pound offensive tackle or something. It just because you don't have time. I mean, because either you don't have the patience, these coaches are going to be gone, or the players will be gone. So it's harder than you think for a coach to be at a place for 5 years. It's not as common as, the assumption is there. Obviously there are, there's a slew. There's who we know are going to be there for, as long as they can, as long as the school wants them, or they want to be at the school, the Dabos and of the world. But for the most part, I mean, the recruiting trail is nice to get a base of players, but really, as it's being proven, you can just go get the guys you want. And if you go back to Belichick, that's what the MAC is there for. Let the MAC and the Sun Belt develop your guys.
All right, Pete, I've been following you nonstop for like the last week. So I think based on what I can tell, after you sorted through everything, you're pleased with what the committee came up with the 12-team playoff field. Is that correct?
Pleased is the wrong way to put it. A bunch of things can be true at once. Somebody had to get in. You had to have a 12th team. The first 11 were easy. The problem with this was that while I have no problem with Alabama not being in, because you can't lose like that to Oklahoma at the end, the process kind of dictated that they shouldn't have been. And, you can be, like, for example, last year, if you really thought Florida State should have been in, all right, I get it. But the process and how the college football playoff worked, and they didn't. And it was actually the right call. You can still be mad about it. On the flip side, I could be mad that if Alabama had gotten in, but that would have been the process working, because there's no case for SMU. Because 2.5 weeks ago, South Carolina just beat Clemson. There aren't really a whole bunch of other factors involved here. So it's pretty even Steven there. So what do you do when the conferences themselves get down to the tiebreakers? It always comes down to head-to-head. So South Carolina beat Clemson. All right. And so in that room in Grapevine, they looked at it and they're like, yeah, okay, well, South Carolina beat Clemson, so we're ranking South Carolina ahead of Clemson. Okay. Well, Clemson just beat SMU. All right. So really you should have ranked Clemson ahead of SMU, but they didn't. And then Alabama beat South Carolina, and they beat the number 2 Georgia SEC champion team. So there's really no case to be made that you could put SMU ahead of South Carolina. And if you can't put SMU in front of South Carolina, you kind of can't put them ahead of Alabama.
All right, that makes sense. Now, I know you've said that Ohio State, on paper, has got the most talent of any team that's in the tournament, probably of any team in the country. How do they match up with Tennessee in that first-round game with the offensive line injuries they have and Tennessee having a good defensive front?
That's everything. And that's where having the 3 weeks off is going to matter. And this is not the explosive Tennessee team of a couple of years ago offensively. They really do struggle. They're not going to score more than 17 points. It's going to be a low-scoring game. So for Tennessee to pull this off, they've got to pull off a defensive gem here because, again, this Ohio State defense is so much better than any D in the country. And so it's going to be like a 20-ish, 17-ish game. If it turns into a shootout, that actually sort of in a weird way probably favors Tennessee just because that means they've opened it up and they figured something out. But this time off, and I just was on the show I do every Thursday and I do another one in Columbus. And I've said this and everyone gets mad at me, that the Michigan loss in kind of a lemons and the lemonade thing was actually a positive. This team needed 3 weeks off. They needed it's like the worst thing that could possibly happen to them happened. All right, done. It's over. Now go win the national championship. So they got 3 weeks off to rest. None of their guys got hurt last week. Carson Beck got hurt for Georgia. So things all of a sudden get a lot better. Get by Tennessee, and then the national championship's probably in the Rose Bowl, Oregon versus Ohio State.
All right, so Oregon, the number 1 seed. Duck fans here are going crazy, and rightfully so, because their team's unbeaten. Dylan Gabriel's playing great football, and they're more stout at the line of scrimmage than they have been in the past. But how difficult is this road to potentially have to go through Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia to win a national championship?
Totally unfair. And it's the problem with the system that Oregon gets absolutely zero break here by getting the 1 seed. Because, yes, okay, in theory, and actually practically, you get the 8 or the 9 winner. I get how that's supposed to work. But even if Ohio State loses, so okay, then you get Tennessee, the team that just beat Ohio State, and you don't get them on a neutral field, which I know Duck fans will go to Pasadena and they'll invade there, but it's still not the same as going to Outson. And look, honestly, and no one wants to say it because it sounds mean, but Boise State's a free space, Arizona State's a free space, and Clemson's kind of a free space. Texas should absolutely roll Clemson. They're just not that good. So then you get the bad break if you're Oregon of you get the 8-9 instead of, maybe getting the Penn State SMU winner, which you'd probably rather have. You'd much rather have like Notre Dame Indiana winner. And instead you'd probably get the Buckeyes in Pasadena, which should be a great game. But if you can win that, you could probably win anything else if you're the Ducks.
I wanted to ask you about these 3 teams, Arizona State, Boise, and SMU. The big underdogs that no one thinks will really make noise. Of those 3 teams, who do you think is the most dangerous?
SMU only because of their tempo style. And they did lose to Clemson. They did come back late. Clemson played it way too close to the vest and almost just prevented themselves away from winning that thing. Penn State's good, but Penn State they have a way of kind of keeping both sides in the game. They're kind of slowly relentless, but they just aren't as explosive. Even though their downfield passing is much better this year, yards per completion, all that, they just aren't quite as explosive as you might want. And if you saw the bowl game, if you remember last year, Penn State was pretty much all in full. Ole Miss was pretty much all in full. And Penn State could not handle the up-tempo attack from Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. It's kind of what SMU does. And so if SMU can just keep Penn State on its heels, then all of a sudden there's a chance there. I don't think Boise State does much of anything. It's a nice story, and they're a good team, and they can hang around for a while. But no, Arizona State, they looked fine, but the Big 12's not that great. So I actually kind of think there's a reasonable case to be made that none of the top 4 seeds win a game. I mean, because again, if I'm saying Ohio State, I think maybe has a real shot to beat Oregon and probably will. Georgia probably gets, Notre Dame, which is dangerous. So this we could get a lot of low seeds in high spots when this thing happens in a couple of weeks.
In the past, Pete, you and I have talked about Arizona State and the great job that Kenny Dillingham has done. What do you think about his approach with players who want to enter the portal, where they can enter and yet remain a part of the program and continue on with the ride as long as they continue to adhere to all of the different things that they have to participate in as a team member?
I get it, but I kind of think that this is the ugliest part of this whole thing. Whereas, first of all, this bowl season is going to be awful because everyone's transferring. All these coaches are gone. You're going to have some teams that are just uniforms with second and third stringers. It's just not going to be good. But I get what you're saying if you're Kenny Dillingham. But if you're a player, I mean, yeah, of course you kind of want to win the playoff and you want to play. This is your teammates, this is what you worked for and stuff. But if you really are planning on getting in the transfer portal and leaving, you kind of go, because the one thing you can't do is get hurt. It's just like opting out for the NFL. If this is your one time where you're going to get paid for playing football, well, this is a business. I mean, as much as as ugly as it is, and as much as we want to be like, oh wow, it's the college football playoff, and all that. Well, no, it's entertainment. It's the entertainment business. And if you're worried about getting hurt, then that's not a guy you probably want out there if you're Kenny Dillingham. But all right, everyone's going to have to handle this differently.
Pete, it's not like Georgia's offense has been dynamic this year, even with Carson Beck. If they have to go with Gunnar Stockton the entire run, can he pull off a run to a title because they're so reliant upon their defense? They win by playing defense and being tough with their front seven. Like, how do you view Georgia now without Carson Beck if he can't go?
I mean, you saw it. I mean, the thing about it, in Ohio State and Georgia are the same bucket. Those are the two best teams. It's just a question of whether they play like it or not. And they're both just so in their own heads because you could tell, you could see how they play. That Michigan loss to Ohio State, just the pressure of the world is on these guys' shoulders. And they gagged. They absolutely gagged it away. And you could see at the end of the first half of that game when they just opened it up, they got new tempo. There it is. That's the team. Now, same thing for Georgia where, okay, well, they kind of played it close to the vest. And they were struggling against Texas. And it was almost like they were playing not to lose, even though they were already in the college football playoff. But then once all of a sudden, okay, we lost our guy. Now we have to actually focus here. And, wow, you could just tell from jump. In the second half of that SEC championship, Texas just looked like a team. They're like, nope, we can't handle this. Because all of a sudden the lines on both sides of Georgia just took over. So if they can maintain that intensity, and now maybe it's one of those cases where they were just waiting for this to get here. Just get to the playoff. This is where you're supposed to be if you're Georgia. And now let's see if that switch flips to on, and we get that type of Georgia throughout this run.
All right. With the Heisman Trophy this weekend, who do you think is going to win?
I'm thinking it's going to be Travis. I mean, I've got a vote, so I can't really say my real feelings on all this. The one thing that we haven't been able to gauge, and I say this as a humongous fan of Coach Prime, and I actually, outside of the berating the media side of him, and that I actually really like Colorado. Travis Hunter, great guy, great in the classroom, all that. But I think that there's a segment of the media out there, the voting public, that just doesn't like the Colorado hype.
Yeah, I agree.
It's going to be like, I can't, like, it's so overhyped. It seems like it's so ESPNized. It's so, I don't want to say manufactured, but I think there's going to be a side of people that just be like, I can't bring myself to vote for this guy just because of the ESPN side of it. The problem with that is, Ashton Genty on the other side, I mean, this is great, but Boise State has yet to beat a Power 4 team this year. And it's fine. The numbers are wonderful, but he was great against Oregon. But, when you're beating up the San Diego States of the world as opposed to doing it in that Power 4 conference, that's a little tough. I mean, Cam Ward, no, he's not going to win it. That shows you how into this one is. I can't remember what the fourth one is. Who am I?
It's Cam Ward and Dylan Gabriel.
Dylan Gabriel, yeah, obviously, nice. I'm only talking to Portland. No, I mean, it's too boring. I'm not giving away my Heisman ballot at all here. But Dylan Gabriel, fine, great player, great team. But was there a true Heisman wow thing? Like he was the signature player of the college football season. So I will be very interested to see what this thing. So long-winded way of saying I think it's going to be Travis Hunter. I do not think it's going to be this coronation, just because I do think there are going to be enough people out there who just don't vote for him just because of the Colorado-ness of this.
So, Pete, you got me wondering right now, which fan base hates you the most right now? Is it Ohio State? Is it Alabama? Like, which fans are giving you the most flack over the last week?
No, not even Alabama. I mean, because Alabama. I've never had a problem with Alabama fans. I mean, throughout this whole run, at some point I hate every fan base because they're all annoying. But for the most part, Alabama has not been a problem. And even Ohio State people don't bother me because I know where they are. It is, and I've said this to their faces. I've said this. It is really, really and truly the most miserable base of fans of any sport ever. It just they cannot be happy. There's nothing that's gonna, even when they win a national championship, they will not be happy.
Yeah,
it's just the way they roll.
Yeah, and if they win it this year, if they win a championship this year, it'll be like, well, we didn't beat Michigan, so it doesn't really count, right? That's what they'll say.
And you're not joking. That is a segment of the population where it's like, well, quit your whining. I mean, like, fine. So then don't. Then just quit playing football for the year. You lost and you'll be sad. Like, it just really is that. It's literally but not all of them, but that group. But really not taking too much flack this year. Last year at this time it was Florida State.
Yeah.
But not really haven't had to deal with that. Where that was just the conspiracy theory crowd where there was just no talking to them about anything.
All right. You got to check him out. Go to collegefootballnews.com. He is the best. He's on social at Pete Fiutak, and he's with us here today. Pete, as always, man, I appreciate the time. Enjoy the less than glamorous bowl season that's coming your way.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Appreciate it. There's Pete Fiutak. All right. So, yeah, he likes Ohio State, and he thinks that first game between Tennessee and Ohio State will be a low-scoring game. I tend to agree with that. Could be a defensive-type battle. I'm also anxious to see how the Vols deal with playing in sub-warm temperatures. Same thing with SMU having to go up north to State College to take on Penn State. And for Oregon, as he put it, unfair, completely unfair to have to, take the path that they're on to be able to win a championship. It's going to be tough. All right, we'll come back, and then Sean Highkin's going to join me again, and we'll check out the Trailblazers' 12 Days of Christmas. I got to make sure I've got to find a way to get over and win a prize. We'll find out what today's prize is next with the 12 Days of Christmas on the Rip City Drive. This is a great song. Jacob's Ladder, right? Huey Lewis. It's a great song. Now, Shacker, I wouldn't necessarily call this a deep cut, but it was a big hit for Huey Lewis in the news, but not one of their most well-known songs, Jacob's Ladder.
Yeah, it's
Give me
no,
some
I
volume
Want a
on
New
that.
Drug.
And you like Huey Lewis, Sean?
Is this we need a ruling? Is this yacht rock or is this just 80s rock?
This is just 80s rock.
Yeah, this isn't yacht rock.
Yeah, this
but-
is Huey Lewis.
But this is good.
The Sport album, you would agree with that, right, Shacker? Huey Lewis in the news, Sport was phenomenal.
Yeah. It was popular rock and roll.
Yeah, popular rock and roll.
And
All
music
right.
videos were still being shown on MTV.
All right, I don't think anyone expects Chauncey Billups to be the head coach of the Trailblazers next year. Like, I'm assuming that most general managers, they've got a short list of guys that they would look at or have interest in hiring as their next guy.
You would think so once it gets to that point.
Yeah. So ideally, I'm just trying to play this out now. So, the Blazers, after the season, they move on from Coach Billups. If they land, let's say, Cooper Flagg, our dream player in the draft, then what type of coach are you looking for if you've got a young team with a potential superstar in Cooper Flagg? Are you looking for an established, like, long-term vet? Are you looking for a young coach that's a developer of talent? Like, what type of guy are you looking for in that spot?
I think generally teams that are I think it's too early to say what the Blazers would look to do at that point if they do decide to make a coaching change at the end of the season. But in that spot, the ones that have had a lot of success have been, you want to try to find whoever the next, whether it's, Jamal Mosley in Orlando, Mark Dagnall in Oklahoma City, Taylor Jenkins in Memphis, kind of that.
Those three guys are great examples of out-of-the-box hires,
Well-
not retreads, who have done an excellent job.
Well, right, but like assistants who have, it's not somebody with like zero NBA coaching experience, but like somebody who has worked their way up as an assistant and maybe isn't, to your point, a retread hire. Like, I think it's a little early to talk about a Blazers head coaching hire at this point because, as of right now, Chauncey Billups is still the coach. And I think after they got through that Memphis thing, I think they're going to ride the season out with him at the very least. But, yeah, I think if they do decide to make a change, if it were me personally, I would try to go in that direction of like a younger assistant or, somebody kind of up and coming like that if you have an up and coming team. And you've seen some success in that. You saw what happened in, Boston when they hired Ime Udoka, and obviously that whatever happened there happened. But then he goes to Houston, and he kind of has that same setup, there. But then, the guy I just mentioned, Jamal Mosley, you look at him, he was an assistant in Dallas for a long time, very well respected there. Orlando hired him when they were kind of in this beginning stage of the rebuild, and now they've got a couple of foundational guys in Paolo and Franz, and now, they're clearly he's set a culture there that that is kind of paying off now. So I don't know. I mean, this is probably a conversation we can have a lot more in depth in April or May.
Yeah, no,
at
it's
that
exciting.
point. But that would be kind of where I would go, just on first blush.
Yeah, I'm just saying, if I was a GM, and I mean, that's an exciting time to be able to go out and, have an opportunity to pick what type of coach you want. But I've been impressed with Jenkins in Memphis. Like, even during the time when they were without Morant, like seeing how that team executes, their style of play, like very impressive coaching job by Jenkins.
And then, I mean, that part of that I think is also just that front office is really good at identifying fringe guys. Jalen Wells, who was a second-round pick this year out of Washington State, and then Jay Huff, who they kind of pulled off the street.
It's amazing. Huff is a great player.
Scottie Pippen Jr.,
Oh, yeah.
who they converted from a two-way to a regular contract. Yeah, I mean, and then yeah, I mean, they've had guys out, like Jaw's been out, Desmond Bane has been out and back in, Jaren Jackson's missed a little bit of time. Like it. And they just keep winning. I think that's definitely a testament to Taylor Jenkins.
Yeah, Huff is a good example. I'm like, who's this guy?
Yeah.
So I had to look it up and realize, like, he came from nowhere, and now he's balling, man. I like stories like that.
What's funny is that most people who don't watch the Blazers on a regular basis probably watch them and are like, Tumani Kamara, he was a second-round pick, and this guy, like, what is this? Like, who is this guy?
Weren't there players on the Suns who were clamoring for? Like, they had seen him in practice. They knew what type of player he could potentially be.
The Blazers didn't just take him as a throw-in, not as specifically targeting him. I'll say that.
Yeah, they knew they were getting a potential gem. He's been
Right.
great.
I would argue he's been the Blazers' best player this season.
Yeah, and we're seeing improvement in all aspects of his game from one year to the next.
And he's still, I mean, we're what are we like almost 2 months into the season right now? He's still shooting 37% from 3-point range.
That's great.
So it seems like that we've seen enough of the season now that that wasn't just like a 2-week blip at the start of the season, that his shooting has improved. So that plus the defense, like I think that's, we're going to probably talk a lot between now and the deadline about, which guys are going to be here long term, which ones aren't. Tumani is one of the 3 guys that I think I'm the most confident is going to still be here in 4 years.
All right. Sean Hike and I are here to put you in the mood for Christmas. Let's do it. All right. You can go to trailblazers.com/12 days right now. And Sean, I think this is pretty cool. 12 days, 12 prizes, 12 chances to win, and each day brings a new prize. So make sure you enter to win each and every day. Premium tickets. You can get a round-trip flight on Alaska Air. They've had some Blazer swag, and they had some great ticket giveaways yesterday. So right now, go to trailblazers.com/12 days, and it will pull up a screen with the numbers 1 through 12. And they've got the number 4 highlighted in plaid because it's the 4th day of the 12 days of Christmas. Click on Enter Now. And then when you go to that, it's going to ask for your first and last name, your email address. Just click Agree to the official rules and hit Enter Now. And the prizes for today, courtesy of Travel Portland, enter for your chance to win a VIP attraction pass along with a Portland snack pack from Tender Loving Empire and a $100 gift card to Q Restaurant in downtown Portland. Have you been to Q Restaurant?
I have not.
I've heard good things about it. Have you been to Q? Shacker's not been to Q. All right, so I'm going to enter to win right now. So courtesy of Travel Portland, enter for your chance to win a VIP attraction pass along with a Portland snack pack from Tender Loving Empire and a $100 gift card to Q Restaurant in downtown Portland. The Trailblazers 12 Days of Christmas. I have now entered to win. So I've done it all 4 days. So each and every day over the next week plus, go to trailblazers.com/12 days for your chance to win a great prize. The 12 Days of Christmas with your Portland Trailblazers. And then tomorrow's game is going to be game 2 of the commemorative glass set. So game 1 was Donovan Clingan glass, and that was the night where he went wild with 12 points, 17 boards, and 5 blocks.
That was the second Minnesota game, right?
Yeah, the second Minnesota game. And that was the night where I remember what you said. You thought going in they were going to get hammered.
Mm-hmm.
They came out and won the game, and you walked away pleasantly surprised. But Clingan had his grandma. He had family in the house, including Nana.
Yeah, and then that was also where Chauncey told us about that bobblehead from Minnesota that didn't look like him at all because it was one of the first NBA bobblehead giveaways. So they were still fine-tuning it. And then at the next home game, Brooke had somebody from the team's broadcasting department buy one on eBay, and they gave it to him during the pregame media stuff.
That was great. And it doesn't really look like Chauncey. It looked more like
I thought Sam Cassell.
Yeah.
Sam Cassell was my immediate thought, yeah.
All right. So you can still get tickets now. Go to trailblazers.com/tickets. The first 7,777 fans who arrive at the arena tomorrow will get a Scoot Henderson glass, which they'll give you a coupon for, and you pick it up on your way out of the arena. And so far, the 2 glasses have been sweet. So I've seen the Scoot glass. It's nice. The Clingan glass is nice. So be there tomorrow. We'll come back. Sean Hikin's in the studio. If you want to jump on board, 503-248-0620. You got the Rip City Drive. All right, Sean Hyken, our Trailblazers insiders, hanging out with me in studio today. Here's a text from the 503. Love the music discussion, especially the Elvis part. I love talking music. Yeah, the music talk
Okay.
is always fun.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go. Do you know the name of what's the title on that Netflix documentary? Because I'm gonna watch that tonight. The Elvis one.
I don't know the name of it, but it just came out recently,
So
so
it's
I'm
right
sure
there on
it's
the main screen.
I'm sure it would be in like the new releases or the it's a good watch. I enjoyed it.
That's good. Okay, I want to see the scene with him on the tractor.
It's so funny because they cut to his wife now looking at it, and she's just like, I can't believe they made him do this.
Dude, my uncle Gordon is a massive Elvis fan, and so he lives in Colorado Springs. But at his house, he's got down in the lower level in the family living room. He's got like a pinball machine, and he's got the TV, and he's got the setup. But one thing that he's got is like an old school jukebox that plays 45s, which I love because when I go there, he'll plug it in and let me go through and play music. But he's got a bunch of old Elvis songs on the 45s. But it's neat to see the old school jukeboxes at work there. But I love going back and listening to the records. Do you have a record player? Do you listen to vinyl at all?
I have one. It's in my parents' house in storage somewhere.
Yeah, storage. Like a lot of people, they got the record player in storage somewhere.
Does Burgerville still have the old jukebox with the 45s? Because when I was a kid, they used to.
I'd have to go back.
I haven't
and check.
been in a
I do
Burgerville in
remember
a
that.
long time, but they used to have
the old school jukebox.
Yeah.
I remember that too. Like the old Pizza Huts, some of the Denny's diners, the Burgerville, like they'd have the jukeboxes,
Yeah.
and so you could go and plug a few quarters in and play some of the songs you like. That was fun to me.
Yeah, it was. I mean, of course, now it's all digital, and they have like that app. If you go to a bar, they have like the jukebox where it's just like a digital thing. It's just an app. It's not the same.
No, it's not. Not the same. Not the same type of feel to it for sure. All right, we're waiting to get word officially on the Trailblazers about their starting lineup
Any
tomorrow.
minute.
And Donovan Klingen's status. So we'll get that any minute. As soon as we get it, we'll have it for you. But I want to go through a couple of sound bites. Bill Belichick taking over at North Carolina. I wanted to get your take on a couple of things that he says, but this is his opening statement and, really his overall thought on taking the job. Here's Bill Belichick today.
I've always wanted to coach in football, coaching college football, and it just never really worked out. Had some good years in the NFL, so that was okay. But this is really kind of a dream come true. I grew up in college football with my dad. As the coach at Navy for 50 years, so as a kid, all I knew was college football, and so it's great to come back home to Carolina and back in an environment that I really grew up in. When you're little, you don't remember everything. Obviously, I was too young to remember a lot of things from Carolina, but as I grew up, you hear the same story over and over and over and over again, and so. One story I always heard was Billy's first words were, "Beat Duke."
All right, so Belichick bringing the one-liners. I guess the hard part for everyone, including myself, is I just assumed that Bill would eventually work his way back into an NFL job because he's pursuing Don Shula and the all-time win record, and he's only like 13 wins away from that. He sits, I think, at 333. And now he's going to take a job in college. I just never envisioned Bill Belichick taking a college job.
They must have just thrown. I mean, is the money out yet?
Yeah, 3 years, $30 million. So $10 million a year, which is pretty reasonable for a coach of his stature.
Is that I would assume he was making more than that. The Patriots, right?
Yeah, I would assume.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's and what is the? I mean, I'm only sort of into the college football stuff. Like, what is like the top college football salary? Like, what are those coaches?
I think you get up closer to like 15 to 20 million.
Okay.
I mean, he's not far from the top. I think usually the top coaches are going to make somewhere between 12 to 18 million a year.
Okay. So this is like in that range, but not.
It's not
fully
disrespectful, but not over the top.
Right. And I guess if you're, somebody who's, obviously he has the success that he's had in the NFL, but he has never coached in college, then, you can't come in and expect to be, the highest paid coach in college football.
I would agree with that.
But
if you're to take an NFL job, then he's got the track record of success on the level and would expect to be one of the top paid
right.
coaches.
He can pick whichever, I'm sure there'd be, if he wanted to coach in the NFL again, he could probably have 5 different teams that would throw money at him and he could just like kind of generate a bidding war. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to go, and I'm also kind of interested in. I mean, he says that it was his dream to be a college football. By the way, there's 0% chance that his first words were actually beat Duke.
Yeah.
There's no way that's true.
Yeah, I don't believe
Like
that.
that's a great line to throw out at a press conference, but
Yeah, see, I love your investigative mind working there because what I think probably happened is I think he is excited to be able to
Yeah.
coach again. But my guess is after going through the cycle last year and then looking around the league and having his people talk to different people in the league, I think he got pretty good idea that he wasn't going to have an opportunity to coach in the league again this offseason. And then because of that, that's when he shifted gears and made the move to college football and had the opportunity in North Carolina. Meaning, I don't know who it was, if it was Robert Kraft, but a lot of people are wondering too if Robert Kraft maybe poisoned Bill to some of the other owners around the NFL. But I think Bill had a pretty good idea that coaching in the NFL and getting a job this offseason probably wasn't going to happen. So he decides to shift gears and go to college.
well, I think it's also, obviously the Patriots thing had kind of run its course and that ends. And then it's kind of, I mean, as much as, I know he is Bill Belichick and he, has the track record that he has, but in any sport, when you're a coach that's 72 and you've been at one place for 20 years or however long he was with the Patriots, even though he is as respected as he is and he's as successful as he is, a lot of these teams now, and this is across all sports, are going to look at they want to look at a younger coach, maybe somebody who's a little bit more modern, somebody who, is a little bit more analytically driven.
Yes.
And you can't just walk in and say, "Oh, I'm Bill Belichick," and just get any job you want.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. And he was asked, here's an exchange, but he was asked, like, why keep coaching at age 72? I mean, that's not young in coaching
No.
years, but here was his response.
I'm roughly your age, so I'd ask you this respectfully. Just at 72, why do you want to keep coaching? What's in it for you? You've proven yourself over and over, and your legacy is set. Why keep coaching?
Well, beats working.
Good.
When you love what you do, and my dad told me this, when you love what you do, it's not work. It's really, I love what I do. I love coaching. I love the interaction with the players. I love building a team, working with the assistants, game planning, the game itself, which, there's some good ones, there's some bad ones, but they're all learning experience and working with, young kids who, with the energy, enthusiasm to want to be good, to want to be successful. It's great every day to wake up and come into that environment.
See, I think you bring up a very good point there, Sean, where the age, it's not because he can't continue to coach at a high level at 72, but if I'm trying to build a football program, my thought is like, how long can he actually be invested in that job and in the program at the age of 72? Like, that's a real concern.
Well, I'll put this in NBA terms because that's what I know the best. Let's say that for whatever reason, I know he has his health stuff right now. So let's say that that wasn't what was going on. Let's say that after last season, the Spurs and Greg Popovich decided to part ways for whatever reason. Even though he's Greg Popovich, he's, in his late 70s at this point. Do you know that like teams would be willing to throw, the kind of money that he would probably want in order to continue coaching? You think he'd be able to just get any job that he wants?
No, it'd be
at that
difficult.
age, especially with, it's been this long since he's won anything. Like, it's not a guarantee that just because somebody is who they are, like, you kind of saw what happened in like Phil Jackson's last few years when he was with the Knicks as the team president. That didn't go well.
Yeah, I just looked it up. Popovich is 75 years of age.
That sounds about right.
Yeah. And you're right. He may decide now with the health issues that he's going to shut it down.
Yeah, I mean, with him, it's a little bit of a different thing because, and I think, first of all, I think Pop probably would have retired until the Spurs, in recent years, until the Spurs won the draft lottery and got Wemby. And then he's like, why don't I just stick around and do this? And the other thing with Pop is that I think it was probably 5-6 years ago, his wife passed away. And I think since then, I don't know the guy that well. I've met him a few
But the
times,
work keeps him going.
I think he just wouldn't know what to do with himself if he wasn't coaching. And I mean, that could be what's going on with Popovich too. And I fully, as somebody who's kind of wired to always be working and always been, I know I'm a lot younger than he is, but I can kind of empathize with that.
Well, I mean, think about it. How I don't know how your dad is doing, but a lot of guys when they retire after they've worked for 30 years and they're used to a routine and doing everything, that transition can be difficult.
Oh no, my dad was ready to be done as soon as but he does not miss it at all.
Oh, so he's
No.
transitioned just fine.
No, but I also know other people who are once they retire after a couple of months, they're like, I'm getting a little bit restless.
They want something to do.
Yeah.
Here's another one. This is Belichick talking about scheme and, what type of defenses you run, what you do. And this is fascinating to me because this is where you hear his football smarts really come out. Take a listen.
Yeah, that's a great question, Andrew. I think in some respects you have more time than with college kids. Not as much meeting time, but more practice time. Certainly more opportunities to practice in pads and work on fundamentals and things like that. So, it's a trade-off. But in the end, scheme-wise, I want to be versatile and take advantage of the personnel that we have. And so I've always coached that way. I don't want to just run one front and run 4 or 5 plays, and that I just don't believe in that. I believe in attacking the defense, in defending what the offense does well, and that takes some versatility. All two teams aren't the same, and I think you have to play them differently from week to week. So that's what we'll do, and we'll use our personnel the best we can to do that. But we'll have a versatile and system that will incorporate any good player. If we have a good player, I've never told Michael, hey, that's a good player, we can't use him. Give us a good player, and our scheme we'll find a way to work that player into the scheme.
This is what's going to be fun to watch for me, Sean, is, Belichick, between the lines on a Saturday when he lines up, whoever he's coaching against, he'll have a significant advantage in terms of his, football knowledge. So it's going to be fun to watch, like in some of these games where he may line up with a team that doesn't have the most talent, how well he can scheme and create a game plan with the players he's got to attack the opponent that he's facing. So he could line up against Clemson or one of these other teams in conference that are better than they are on paper, but how well can he scheme to put his players in a position to have success? Like that's where we could see moments of that coaching brilliance from, Belichick.
Yeah, but it's also just, because he's not coaching pros, the skill level and the, ability, he can come up with the greatest scheme in the world, but you got to be able to adapt it to guys who aren't as experienced.
Exactly.
Have not everybody who's on a college team is going to make it to the NFL. So the talent level and the skill level is not going to be what he's used to.
It's funny. I was talking with Michael Holton the other night, and of course he coached at UOP, and he was telling me just some of the simple differences between like NBA players and college players. He said that in college, if you call a timeout and you're trying to devise a play on a key possession, he goes, I can't draw up a play if we haven't gone over it in practice. He goes, in the NBA, the coach, because he's dealing with professionals who have done a variety of different things, you can draw up a play on the fly that you didn't work on in practice, but you can draw it up and hand it to your players, and they can go out and execute it.
And
that's the difference.
And they'll at least kind of know, okay, this is kind of what he's trying to do here.
Exactly. That's the difference between a college and a pro player, at least through Michael's eyes. And that made sense to me, where when you're dealing with pros who have years and years of experience and have been in all sorts of different situations, you can draw something up and they can go out and execute because they understand the concepts that you're throwing out there at them. That's fascinating to me. All right, we'll keep things rolling. We're going to get word here on Donovan Clingan shortly. When we do, we'll get that to you. Sean Highkin hanging out with me in the studio. You got the Rip City Drive. All right, Rip City Drive. Shacker, were you trying to communicate something to me? I was in the middle of yapping to Sean.
Do I have what now?
Niner game started.
Oh, yeah, your 49er game. I don't have it up because I know you're going to probably watch it later. Are you watching it live right now? Oh, you're watching the game live. See,
First time this season.
Shacker's one of these guys, Sean, where he records, he watches basically every NFL game there is. So because he does it that way, a lot of times he doesn't watch it live because he's busy working, so he doesn't want to know the score. So a lot of times I'll have the game up on my computer in here. So he'll ask me to turn my computer so he doesn't see it on the YouTube video or maybe in a reflection because he doesn't want me to give away the score.
I had a
can see it on
roommate
the
in
reflection
college.
Of the mirror to
I
your
had
left.
I had a roommate in college one year who was a huge Cowboys fan, and he would always DVR the games and then get like super mad when anybody told him what the score was.
Yeah, and I've heard the Larry David talk on this because he does the same thing with like Jet games.
Yeah.
And he gets mad when people call. He's like, "Hey, have you seen the score?" He's like, he thinks that you should assume tape and never bring up a score of any game. It's so hard to go dark in today's world.
Yeah, I feel like if you're, I understand if there's like a TV show that like, because I remember, I used to watch like Mad Men and stuff when that was on, and I would be like, well, if I can't watch it live, I'm just gonna like not look at Twitter for a couple hours until I'm able to watch it. But for a live sporting event, you gotta like, if you can't watch it live, that's you just gotta deal with if you find out something that happens, or
if you
find out
stumble
the score.
across a score, that's going to happen from time to time.
Right, a scripted thing where it's like I think it's totally reasonable to expect somebody to be like give you, if you haven't watched it, give you a few days before they want to like talk about it or spoilers or whatever. But for a live sporting event, like there's just not anything you can do about that.
I agree. Now I was just talking to you about concerts, and I'm like, what's the best concert you've seen?
Mm-hmm.
And you gave me a show that I don't think I can top because I can't believe he played at this venue. But what is your number one?
About 12 years ago, I want to say, I saw Prince at the Roseland.
Shacker, he saw Prince at the Roseland.
Were the lights on? Could you see him?
I could see him.
That's a big time show.
Well, what's funny is
But the Roseland is a small
it
venue.
holds like 1,500 people, yeah.
I saw Stone Temple Pilots there.
How good was the venue for them? Awesome,
It was
right?
good. It was
Yeah.
packed.
When
there was
was-
no elbow room. It was sold out.
What year was that?
Was this when Weiland was still live? Or
It was when they were coming back with the new singer.
okay.
But
yeah.
it sold out right away.
How good were they without Weiland? I've
They were
never
good.
seen them in
it's
concert.
like them and Alice in Chains. They got a better lead singer. It's just they're not
Yeah.
as famous with their new lead singers.
When it's the singer, though, it's hard for me to get into like, okay, because I actually saw the new Alice in Chains opening for when I still lived in Chicago. I saw Guns N' Roses at Soldier Field. This was when Slash and Duff first came back in, and Alice in Chains opened, and the singer was good. He sounded exactly like Lane Staley, but it's just like, okay, he's just a guy singing the songs. He's not the guy. When it's the lead singer, it's a lot harder for me to get into, if it's not, the original singer. Like that's tougher for me.
Do you know what's amazing about that? Like, I remember like being a senior in high school, like the early '90s, like some of that new and fresh Stone Temple Pilots at the time, and then Alice in Chains.
Uh-huh.
Like when Man in the Box came out, like my mind was blown. I'm like, whoa, this sounds so good. Some of that Stone Temple Pilot stuff was nice.
That stuff holds up pretty well. And I know they were kind of viewed at the time as one of like the wannabe, like they weren't, they a level below the kind of, top line, stuff from that scene. But that stuff's aged pretty well. I actually have tickets to see Jerry Cantrell in March at the Wonder Ballroom.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah. So.
Well, that music you like stomped away the glam metal that was big right before grunge.
Yeah. Who was it? I think it was David Spade. Remember when he used to do the Hollywood Minute on Saturday Night Live? I think he cracked on Stone Temple Pilots once because he's like, yeah, I went and saw Stone Temple Pilots. They were better the first time when I saw them when they were called Pearl Jam. That
I
kinda
just
deal.
saw Pearl Jam for the first time earlier this year when they were at Moda.
Oh, how was that?
Great.
I've heard they put on a very good
They're-
live show.
Oh, they're excellent. And the thing that I was blown away by was how good it sounded. Because like Moda's fine. It's not the best arena I've seen its show at. It's not the worst. Their sound was so good. Like it was so clear. It was so dialed in. I don't know what they did or what their sound guy did, but yeah, I mean, they sounded great. Eddie Vedder's voice still sounds exactly like it sounded in the 90s. He was
That's
great.
great. I went and saw the probably about 8 months ago. I saw the Ringo All-Star Band for the first time.
That was my first concert
Oh, it was.
in 2000. 2000 or 2001. I was in like 5th grade, and that was at the Schnitz.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I mean, I love Ringo, and he had Steve Lukather, and then Colin Hay from Men at
Yeah.
Work was there. So, Edgar Winter was there. So a lot of good artists. But I saw it at that amphitheater there at the Venetian,
Mhm.
and it was nice because it's a smaller venue, so that the acoustics were really good. The other one I like is the Forum down in L.A. That's good acoustics for sound. The Motor Center's,
Yeah.
it's okay.
It's not the best. It's not the worst. I think I like it more than United Center. I saw a bunch of stuff there when I was in Chicago. You ever seen McCartney? Speaking of the Beatles,
No, and I wish I had.
if you
because
ever, if he, he still tours. If he
Yeah.
ever comes back around, you should.
I
'Cause
gotta
he's still
check him
really
out.
good. He still plays like a 3-hour show, and it's like mostly Beatles stuff.
Gosh, it's so good. My best friend lives down in Vegas, and what he did is one of his friends down there said, "Hey, you want to be a part of this work crew for the McCartney concert?" And he's like, "Yeah, why not?" So he went, and they got to they had to do like some work before the show or whatever, but then they got free access to the
Sure.
show. And he had never seen McCartney, but he walked away like blown away.
Yeah.
At his age, how long he was able to perform and how good they did. Like he thought he sounded awesome.
I saw Springsteen a couple years ago. The last time he was here,
He
and
still puts on a long show. Doesn't
I've
he?
seen him. I mean, I've seen him probably 2-3 times, but this most recent time, yeah, he was like 3-hour show, running around on stage. He's probably 75, 76 at this point.
Dude, you know what I've realized from some of these artists, the guys from that era?
Uh-huh.
I think for the ones who survived, the
Yeah.
drugs and all the
Right,
craziness,
right.
and they come out on the other side of it, and there's still people showing up to listen to their music. You can see it in their eyes when they're like, there's a certain appreciation they have for
Yeah.
the people that still support them, and that they're still in a position where they can perform. And I think they're enjoying playing music more than they ever have because they've made it to the other side of all the madness.
Well, we're talking, we were just talking in the last segment about Bill Belichick, and it's like he's made all the money in the world. Why is he still coaching? Why are any of these guys still doing it? Because they still I don't know. I've only seen the Stones once, and that was like almost 25 years ago. I was a kid when I saw the Stones, but I know a couple of people who saw them on their most recent tour, and apparently Mick is still as good as he's ever been as far as like performing and how his voice sounds.
And he's not young.
He's in his 80s.
Yeah,
He's
same
like
as-
81, 82.
And so is Ringo.
Both of McCartney is also in his 80s. Ringo's 83, 84.
Yeah, and Ringo, he was great.
You know who I just saw over the summer in Eugene at the Cuthbert?
Who?
That was really, really good, and he's like 78, 79. John Fogerty,
Oh, Fogerty.
playing all the CCR stuff. It was great.
Ah. And he still sounds good.
He still sounds like he sounded on the records.
Huh.
It's one of the best shows I've seen in a long time.
All right, so the recent concerts I've seen, I saw Toto and Journey together down in Vegas.
Okay.
I went down to Vegas. My best friend lives down there, so I go down there often. But we saw Kenny Loggins on his final tour.
Okay.
He was fabulous. And then the Ringo All-Star Band, which was terrific. And then that's why I'm excited because this new concert just got announced. So Colin Hay, who was the lead singer of Men at Work,
Yeah.
he's been with Ringo for a long time now. But they just announced this new concert tour that's going to start next year. Toto, Men at Work, and Christopher Cross. So that's like you got a little bit of rock, and you got the mixture of the yacht rock. So that's going to be a great show.
That's a good time for them to announce that tour because I'll bet a lot of people watch that Yacht Rock documentary. Where's that playing? Is that at Moda?
They're going to have it up at the Clark County Amphitheater.
I hate that amphitheater.
I know.
It's not my favorite. I've seen stuff there. It's not my favorite place to see a
No,
show.
and the problem is I live like literally 4
Yeah.
to 5 minutes from home to parking lot. But getting out of the parking lot, it's not my favorite venue. And plus, that's the first Saturday, August 30th is when they're going to be there at that show in Clark County. That's like the first college football Saturday. So what I'm going to do, they're going to be in Vegas the week before on the 23rd.
You're going to go down, do
So
the
I think
trip.
I'm going to go down and do the trip down there because I went and saw Christopher Cross in Reno back in 2021, I think it was. And this was like the anniversary of his first album that won a Grammy. And he was terrific in concert because what I like about shows, and you've probably been to concerts like this where they'll play a few songs, but then he'll talk. He was telling stories behind the songs and the album and what inspired the songs. And so like as you're getting the storytelling throughout the show, I was like, okay, I'm all about this right now. It was great.
Fogerty was kind of like that too, because I guess the point of this tour was that he had just won whatever lawsuit with his record label and got back all the publishing rights to his songs.
Yeah.
And so this was the first time he was doing a tour where basically the whole set was just CCR stuff. And so between songs, he was just talking about like, oh yeah, I wrote this song after Woodstock, or like this is the guitar that like my wife found this guitar and it was the guitar that I wrote this song on, but it got lost and now I have it. Like he was telling a lot of that stuff, and it's just like there are certain people where like when they're still alive, when you're seeing them in concert, and McCartney was obviously one of these people. When I saw the Stones, it was like that. I've seen Bob Dylan, I've seen Stevie Wonder. When it's somebody like at that level, you're just like at a certain point it hits you like I am in the same room as this. This is the guy. This is who wrote this
legend
stuff. It's like, I mean, there's certain people on the like one of my biggest regrets, and this is kind of why now whenever any of these kind of older guys tours, I always try to go because I never got to see David Bowie. And now, and he came to Moda Center in like 2004. I think the last time he toured. I was in 8th grade. I wanted to go. My parents wouldn't take me. And then that was the last time he toured, and then he died, and I never got to see Bowie.
I think we got a picture up on the wall somewhere here in the building of Bowie from that show.
At that show, yeah. No, I had a friend that went, but I didn't get to go. But like but now it's like, now I'm kind of trying to check these off as much. Like I've seen Springsteen, I've seen both David Gilmour and Roger Waters separately. I've seen Elton John. I saw him before he ended up.
Okay, so I've seen Billy Joel in concert, but I've not seen Elton John.
Not a Billy Joel guy.
How good was Elton John in concert?
I mean, I saw him like 12 years ago, but he was great.
Fabulous.
I mean, he's one of those guys where like it's kind of funny with a lot of these because you were talking about like the yacht rock deep cuts and stuff.
Yeah.
A lot of times, if it's an artist that you like know really well, you kind of go into it wanting to hear the deep cuts or whatever.
Uh-huh.
Elton John is somebody, I mean, you can maybe you go deeper in the catalog than I do, but Elton John's best songs are his hits.
Yeah.
And he plays all of them.
And he's got a ton of them.
Yeah. And like, you don't realize that until it's like he plays the guy plays a 3-hour show, played 30 songs, and it's like, yeah, every single one of these is
over several decades.
It's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a wildly talented freak. He's a freak.
And his voice still, like, he had that throat surgery in their 80s, so his voice now sounds lower than it did back in the 70s when he recorded all that stuff, but he still sounds good. He can still sing all that stuff.
I was talking, who was I interviewed? I interviewed Daryl Hall once, and I asked him, like, how, because he's old now, too. I'm like, how'd you take care of your voice?
Yeah.
And he told me that his mom was like a gospel singer, and both his parents were into music, but his mom taught him early on how to care for his voice at a young age. So he was able to keep that throughout the course of his life so that you can save some of your voice. Because, age treats everyone a little bit differently, but it can have an impact to where you got to change the keys in which you sing it and so forth.
You know who sounded still really good when I saw it? And this, granted, this was like 20 years ago when I was in high school, but I saw Aerosmith at the Clark County Amphitheater. Steven Tyler still sounded incredible.
Oh, Steven Tyler. They got some good music, too.
Yeah, that was a good show.
And from multiple decades, too. I mean,
I tend to lean more. I tend to lean more towards the earlier stuff, the 70s stuff, but yeah.
That's great. Have you seen Elton John, Shacker? You've been to a billion concerts.
Yeah, I've not seen Elton John. There's a lot of shows that I haven't seen. David Bowie, which is why I'm trying to get to the classic bands, because REO Speedwagon opened for Train, and I'm like, I got to see that. A week later, they announced they're done touring.
Yeah.
We'll see if they're actually done touring. We'll see if anybody's done touring.
Well, me and my buddy Steve, we were down in Phoenix. We went down for a sports weekend, so we caught a few different football games or whatever. And we got word that Phil Collins was going to be doing a concert there at the arena. And so we extended our trip out, and that was his farewell tour. And so we went to go see him, and I've always admired his music, but I'd never seen him in concert. And I'm glad we went, but you could tell that his voice was not the same towards the end of that tour than it had been when he was younger, but we still got to hear all the hits.
That one's kind of tough. I saw some videos of the last, I think like a couple of years ago, Genesis got back together.
Yeah, and he was sitting in a chair.
He was sitting in a chair, and you could tell that he could like barely sing all that stuff.
And he was still doing some of that. He stood for some of the songs, but he was sitting in a chair for some of the songs at the solo tour. But it was cool because he had his son playing drums.
Yeah, that's cool. But like, if somebody's gonna be, here's one. I just saw the other day that Elvis Costello announced a tour, and he's coming here. He's coming to Schnitz, and the theme of the tour is he's going to be playing all stuff from his first 3 records, which I think are his best records. And so I was like really excited about it. And then somebody told me I should go check out some of his recent stuff on his recent live performances on YouTube.
Did you check it? How did it sound? Not good.
I don't know if I'm going to go.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to go now. It was pretty tough. He was doing the thing where, like, I watched a performance of Allison, and he was doing the thing where he was like singing halfway behind the beat, and so it was like sounded like it was like out of sync from like what the band was playing, and it was just I don't know if that's what it's going to sound like. I might not go now, which is unfortunate because that's a show I would have been really excited about.
Okay, so who's the band or artist on your list that you have not seen that you want to see that's still playing?
Bjork, and then it kind of more in the rock realm, probably Metallica.
You haven't seen Metallica?
No, I haven't.
I haven't either.
Was going to do it this summer. They did the 2 nights at the Seahawks Stadium.
Yeah.
Actually, Burkhart and I talked about going up to that, but it just
Did Burkhart go? He's like a Metallica freak.
No. Because we talked about it, and neither of us were able to end up getting to do it. But I want to see them.
Have you seen Metallica, Shacker?
I've seen Metallica before, but the show they're talking about was up against college football, like this Men in Work show that's coming next year. So yeah, I didn't get to go because it was up against college football.
Huh.
See, that's kind of a downside of what you guys. If the show is up against college football, that's not a deal breaker.
Well, speaking of documentaries, there's a documentary. I don't know the title of it, but it's on Colin Hay, the lead singer.
I haven't seen it.
Well, you got to watch it because he went through that phase where like they were massive hits in the 80s.
Uh-huh.
And then the band dissolved, and then he was like out of music, and then he started playing in like coffee shops and doing shows basically for free. And then he slowly started to gain steam again, and then got connected with Ringo Starr and started being, out there on tour again.
What is this on? Like what platform?
It's a good question. I can't remember which platform. I have to look it up for you now. But it's really good. Like when I get a personal connection to a guy and I know their story, it makes me want to go see him more now. So to see him, perform some of the Men at Work songs at the Ringo concert was Ringo's a genius. How great is that? Where they bring out you've got Edgar Winter playing Frankenstein. You've got Luca. They're doing some of the Toto stuff. Like you got all these guys, and they're combining together to play some of the hit songs. I thought that was genius.
When I saw him, he had Sheila E. as his other drummer, so there was some of the Prince stuff too.
Yeah. But going back to the original point about Prince, like in that venue being so intimate, to see a guy like that up close and personal, like it doesn't get any better.
It was unbelievable.
How great was he on the guitar?
They did this like slow jam version, like this kind of slow like power ballad version of "I Could Never Take the Place of Your Man," which I'm sure it's on YouTube somewhere. But go find it. I'll find it later and send it to you. But that's one like that arrangement of that performance. That might be like my favorite Prince song.
Okay, here it is. I just found the Colin Hay. It's on YouTube. So you
just a free documentary.
It's just a free documentary on YouTube called Colin Hay. Waiting for My Real Life.
I'll
Full
check
music
that out.
documentary. It's
I'll check that
hour
out.
and 24 minutes. You'll like it though.
I'll check it out.
There you go. Man, Prince, 1,500, you get into a venue like that. I mean, where did I go? I saw Toto down back in 2019 down in Phoenix. They were playing at this place called the Celebrity Theater.
Okay.
And I had never been there before, but it's it's a small venue that holds a couple thousand. But in the middle, the band is on this stage that just slowly rotates. And so there's seats all the way around the rotating stage, but you're right up there close to the stage. And so you're getting a chance to see every member that's on stage playing as their stage is rotating. I was and the acoustics were great. But the cool part is the story that I love is, and I'll tell you the whole story when we come back. A story behind one of the songs on the Thrill album, which it's a great story.
When we come back, here's a tease. We've also got the Blazers injury report.
All right, good. So we got Blazer injury report. We'll get the latest on Donovan Clingan and Robert Williams. And then I'll tell Sean a sweet music story about Thriller on the Rip City Drive. All right, we have an update on your Portland Trailblazers for tomorrow night's game against the Spurs. What's the latest, Sean?
Well, as expected, both Donovan Clingan and Robert Williams are officially listed on the injury report for tomorrow as questionable, which, again, as I said earlier, when somebody who hasn't played for a little bit is listed as questionable, that means they're going to try to go. So the hope, I mean, we'll find out for sure tomorrow in about 24 hours, but I would assume Donovan Clingan's going to go, and then with Robert Williams, it's just a matter of does he clear the final? Because I think he has to clear another test tomorrow too, but I must have cleared the one today. So I think right now the plan and the hope is for both of those guys to be able to go, but we'll find out for sure tomorrow.
Okay, that's terrific news. And as you and I have talked about, the Blazers without their size, I mean, that's part of the reason why there's been some struggle defensively and with rebounding over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and one more injury note, DeAndre Ayton is also listed as questionable with an illness. He also wasn't at practice today, so that's not a surprise.
Okay,
But,
all right.
So those are the things to kind of keep an eye on.
And if there's a game where you want to get Klingon and Williams back on the floor,
Yeah.
Wemby being in town's a good time to do it.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty excited for the Klingan Wemby matchup, and also the Klingan Stephon Castle matchup because
No
they
question.
played together at UConn.
That's going to be fun to watch. And Wemby is. I mean, I've watched the NBA for a long time. Haven't seen a specimen quite like him. He's a unique.
It's one of those ones where you see it in person, and he does like 4 things a game where you're just like, I don't even feel like he had a great game the one time he played here last season, and you look at his stat line and it was like 37 and 15 and 4 blocks or something like that. I don't have it in front of me, but it didn't even look like he was that dominant. And you just look down and you're just like, wait, this is what he's doing. Okay.
That's awesome. All right, so Klingon and Robert Williams listed as questionable. Good chance we're going to see them tomorrow night with the Blazers and Spurs. That game will tip off at 7. Also, tickets still available. If you buy tickets at trailblazers.com and you're one of the first 7,777 fans to the arena, you will get a Scoot Henderson glass 2 of their commemorative glass set. The first one was Klingon. Tomorrow night will be Scoot Henderson. And if you're one of the first 7,777 fans there, you will get a Scoot Henderson glass. All right, we were talking about music. So when I was at this concert in 2019 with Toto down at the Celebrity Theater there down in Phoenix, they had there was a portion of the concert where it wasn't acoustic, but they were playing portions of songs and telling the stories behind it. And Steve Porcaro, they got ready to play Human Nature.
Mm-hmm.
And so he shared the story behind it, that what happened is that so Steve Porcaro was living with David Page of Toto back in the 80s during the making of the Thrill album. And what Page would do is that he would put together like tracks, like play different tracks and put together a bunch of different tapes, cassette tapes for Quincy Jones.
Uh-huh.
A courier would come over to Page's house every day and take it over to Jones, and Jones would listen to the different tracks to see if there was something that caught his ear that might work for the album. And so